Hello and welcome. I hope you all enjoy tonight's cryptid horror stories. The Beast of Exmoor. The rolling hills of Exmoor had stood since before recorded history, the ancient moorland stretching across the border of Devon and Somerset in southwestern England, a landscape of heather and bracken and granite tors that rose from the mist like the bones of the earth itself. And for centuries, this land had been home to shepherds and farmers who raised their flocks on the tough grasses and weathered the harsh winters that swept down from the Bristol Channel. But in recent decades, a new presence had made itself known, a phantom that stalked the moors in darkness, a creature that left behind not legends but corpses, not stories but slaughter, and the Beast of Exmoor was about to prove itself far more than local superstition to a group of people who would encounter it in the blood-soaked fields of Blackmoor Farm. Detective Inspector Sarah Williams had spent 20 years with the Devon and Cornwall police, had investigated hundreds of crimes, from petty theft to murder, and she thought she had seen the worst that humanity could offer. Thought she understood the depths of violence and cruelty that humans could descend to, but she was wrong, she would discover, for the worst violence was not human at all, but something older, something wilder, something that wore the shape of a beast but possessed a cunning that no animal should have. The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of call that should have been routine, just another dead sheep, just another predator attack, just another inconvenience for a farmer who would claim insurance and bury the losses and move on. But this call was different. The officer on the scene had sounded shaken, had spoken of things that made no sense, of injuries that couldn't be explained, of a scene of carnage that defied description, and Sarah had dragged herself from her bed, pulled on her clothes, and driven out to Blackmoor Farm through the pre-dawn darkness, the fog so thick she could barely see the road, the wipers barely keeping pace with the condensation that coated the windshield. The farm sat at the end of a narrow lane that wound up from the village of Dulverton, climbing into the hills until the trees gave way to open moorland, and Sarah navigated by memory and the occasional reflective marker, her headlights cutting through the fog to illuminate nothing but the white wall of mist that surrounded her vehicle, and she felt the familiar sensation of unease that the moors inspired in her, the sense of isolation, of vulnerability, of being watched by unseen eyes from the darkness that pressed against her windows. She found the farmyard crowded with vehicles, police cars and the farmer's Land Rover, and an ambulance that seemed unnecessary given that the victims were livestock. But she understood why it was there when she saw the first body, a sheep lying on its side near the gate, its throat torn out, its entrails spread across the ground in a pattern that suggested not random feeding but deliberate arrangement. The organs placed in a circle around the corpse, and she felt her stomach turn at the sight, at the precision, at the artistry of the killing. For this was not the work of a fox or a dog or even a legitimate wild predator. This was something that killed for pleasure, for sport, for reasons that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with dominance, with power, with the joy of destruction. James Blackmoor, the farmer, was a man of 60 who had worked this land since childhood, who knew every inch of his property, every sheep in his flock, every predator that might threaten them, and he stood near the barn with a shotgun in his hands, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a fear that Sarah had never seen in a man who had faced down bankruptcy and disease and the harsh realities of agricultural life. And he spoke to her in a voice that trembled, telling her that he had found the first bodies at dusk, that he had counted them, had tried to save the ones that still lived, and had failed, that the creature had killed 23 sheep in a single night, had not just killed them but had mutilated them, had torn them apart with a ferocity that suggested rage, that suggested intelligence, that suggested something that knew what it was doing and enjoyed it. The veterinary examination that followed confirmed what Sarah suspected, what the scene suggested, that the predator was large, very large, far larger than any legitimate British carnivore, with a bite force and claw marks consistent with a big cat, a panther or a puma or something similar. But there were no big cats in Britain, hadn't been for thousands of years, and the Ministry of Agriculture had investigated similar claims in the past, had always found explanations, had always dismissed the sightings as mistaken identity or hoaxes or exotic pets that had escaped and died quickly in the unfamiliar climate. But this was different. This was not a sighting. This was not a footprint in the mud or a blurry photograph. This was 23 dead sheep. This was slaughter. This was proof that something large and deadly was stalking Exmoor. The first human victim was discovered 3 days later. A hiker named Michael Chen who had been walking the Two Moors Way. His body found in a gully near the village of Hawkridge. His throat torn out. His chest opened. His organs arranged in the same pattern as the sheep, and the authorities were forced to acknowledge what they had been trying to ignore, that there was a large predator on the moor, that it was dangerous, that it had tasted human blood and found it good, and the hunt began in earnest, the police coordinating with local farmers and gamekeepers, and eventually the Ministry of Defense, for the situation had become too serious to ignore, too deadly to dismiss, and the Beast of Exmoor became national news, the subject of headlines and debates and speculation that ranged from the scientific to the sensational. The hunting party that formed was a mix of professionals and amateurs, police marksmen and local farmers and curious civilians who thought themselves capable of tracking and killing a creature that had evaded capture for years, if not decades, and they spread out across the moor, armed with rifles and shotguns and high-powered lamps, confident of success, certain that numbers and technology would prevail over a mere animal, however large, however dangerous. They were wrong. The first to die was Robert Hawkins, a local gamekeeper who had tracked the beast for years, who knew its habits, its territory, its patterns, and he thought he understood what he was hunting, thought he knew how to find it, how to kill it, and he went out alone one evening, against the advice of his colleagues, convinced that he could take the creature by surprise, and his body was found the next morning, dragged half a mile from where he was attacked, his throat torn out, his face frozen in an expression of surprise, as though he had seen his killer clearly in the final moments and could not believe what he was looking at, and his rifle was found unfired, his safety still on, suggesting he had not had time to react, had not had time to defend himself, had been taken so quickly, so efficiently, that he had died before he understood what was happening. The second to die was Detective Sergeant Alan Foster, Sarah's partner, who had been investigating the attacks, who had been trying to understand the creature, to predict its movements, to anticipate where it would strike next, and he had been close, had been very close, had identified a pattern in the killings. A territorial range, a set of behaviors that suggested the beast was not just hunting for food but was defending a territory, was eliminating threats, was engaging in the kind of strategic thinking that no animal should be capable of, and he had gone to check a site, a location where he believed the beast might den. Had gone alone because he wanted to be sure before he brought in the others, and he had found the den, or it had found him, and his body was discovered 2 days later, buried under bracken, hidden, concealed, as though the creature had tried to hide him, to keep his death secret, to prevent the others from knowing what had happened, and Sarah identified him by his wedding ring, by the scar on his hand, by the clothes that were all that remained intact, for the beast had consumed most of him, had fed on him, had left only enough to identify the body and terrify those who found it. The third to die was a journalist, Emily Carr, who had come to Exmoor to report on the hunt, to write the story that would make her career, to capture the beast on camera and prove to the world that it was real, and she had been confident, had been arrogant, had believed that her camera and her press credentials would protect her, and she had gone out at night, alone, against all advice, to get the exclusive, to get the shot, to get the proof, and the beast had found her, had stalked her, had toyed with her, for her body showed signs of having been pursued, of having been run down, of having been exhausted before the killing blow, and her camera was found with her, the memory card intact, and the footage it contained showed the last moments of her life. The night vision capturing the shape that emerged from the darkness, the massive body, the long tail, the eyes that reflected the light with a glow that was not natural, not animal, but something else, something intelligent, something evil. And the video ended with the camera falling, with Emily's scream, with the sound of something heavy moving through the undergrowth. And the footage was classified. Destroyed, buried, but Sarah saw it, saw the truth, saw what they were dealing with, and she understood that this was not a mere animal, not an escaped exotic pet, not a big cat that had somehow survived in the British countryside, but something else, something worse, something that had evolved or adapted or been created to be the perfect predator, the perfect killer, the perfect hunter of humans. The survivors of the hunt were few, for the beast was cunning, was intelligent, was patient, and it hunted the hunters, took them one by one, isolated them from the group, eliminated them quietly and efficiently, and the survivors learned to stay together, to move in groups, to never venture out alone, to never go out at night, to treat the moor as a war zone, as occupied territory, as the domain of a power that was stronger, faster, and smarter than they were. Sarah Williams was one of the survivors, the senior officer who had to maintain order, who had to coordinate the search, who had to make the decisions that would keep people alive, and she bore the weight of each death, each failure, each mistake that cost another life. And she learned, adapted, changed, became the hunter rather than the hunted, used her police training, her investigative skills, her understanding of predator behavior to track the beast, to anticipate its movements, to set traps and ambushes that would finally end the terror. The final confrontation came on a night in December, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, when the beast was at its strongest, its most active, its most dangerous. And Sarah had set a trap, baited with the one thing she knew the creature could not resist, the one thing that drew it out, that made it reckless, that overcame its caution and its cunning. And that was the challenge, the threat, the presence of someone who knew it, who understood it, who was hunting it, and she went out alone, against all advice, against all protocol, into the darkness, onto the moor, with only her service weapon and a knife and her determination to end this, to kill the beast, to avenge the dead. And she found it, or it found her, in a valley between two tors, the moon breaking through the clouds to illuminate the scene. And she saw it clearly for the first time, the Beast of Exmoor, and it was beautiful and terrible and real. It stood 6 feet long, perhaps longer, its body sleek and muscular, covered in black fur that absorbed the moonlight, its tail trailing behind it like a whip, its eyes glowing with an amber light that held intelligence, malice, and something else, something that looked almost like recognition, almost like respect, almost like the acknowledgement of a worthy opponent. And it did not attack immediately, did not charge, did not rush in, but stood and watched and waited. And Sarah understood that this was a ritual, a ceremony, the final act of a hunt that had been going on for weeks, months, perhaps years, and she was the final prey, the final victim, or the final hunter, depending on how this ended. And she raised her weapon, and the beast tensed, and the moment stretched into eternity, and then the gun fired, and the beast leaped, and Sarah fired again, and again, and the creature was on her, its weight crushing her, its claws tearing her, its jaws closing on her shoulder with a pressure that broke bone. And she felt the teeth, felt the hot breath, felt the life draining out of her. And she knew she was dying, knew she had failed, knew the beast had won. And she closed her eyes and waited for the end, but the killing blow did not come. The jaws did not close, the throat was not torn. And she opened her eyes to find the creature looking at her, its face inches from hers, its breath hot and rank with the smell of blood and meat. And it held her gaze for a long moment, a moment that seemed to stretch across time, across space, across the boundary between human and beast, between hunter and hunted, between life and death. And then it released her, stood, backed away, and vanished into the darkness, leaving her bleeding, broken but alive. And she never understood why, never knew what had stayed the killing blow, never learned what had made the beast spare her. But she carried the scars for the rest of her life. Carried the memory of those amber eyes, carried the knowledge that she had been marked, chosen, saved for some purpose that she would never understand. And she left Exmoor, left Devon, left England, moved to the city, to the safety of crowds and concrete and light. And she never went back, never spoke of what had happened. Never told anyone that the beast was still out there, still hunting, still waiting, for she knew that it was, knew that it would always be, knew that it was eternal, unkillable, unstoppable, and that she had survived only because it had allowed it, had chosen to spare her, had marked her for some future purpose that would eventually be fulfilled. The Beast of Exmoor continued to hunt, continued to kill, continued to stalk the moors and the farms and the villages of Devon and Somerset, and the authorities covered it up, explained it away, blamed dogs, blamed foxes, blamed poachers and vandals, and anything but the truth, and the beast fed. And it grew, and it became legend. Myth, story, warning, and those who heard the stories and heeded them lived, and those who heard them and scoffed died, and the cycle continued, eternal and unending, until the moors were built over, until the land was tamed, until the last wild place was destroyed. And even then, the beast would find new territory, new prey, new victims, for it was not bound to Exmoor, was not limited to Devon and Somerset, but was a force of nature, a principle of predation, an aspect of the wild that would exist as long as there was darkness, as long as there was hunger, as long as there were fools who ventured into the night thinking themselves safe, thinking themselves masters of the world, and the beast would teach them, would show them, would kill them, and the hunt would continue, forever and ever, until the end of time. The 3 survivors of the Exmoor hunt were few, for the beast had killed many, had taken the brave and the foolish and the merely unlucky, and those who survived were marked by their encounter, changed by their experience, haunted by their memories, and they carried the truth with them, the knowledge of what stalked the moors, of what hunted the night, of what waited in the darkness. And they warned others when they could, when they were believed, when their warnings were heeded, and some lived because of them, and some died despite them. And the beast fed, and the legend grew, and the fear spread. And the moors remained dangerous, deadly, demonic, and the beast waited and watched, and hungered for the next victim, the next meal, the next sacrifice to the eternal hunt. Sarah Williams, James Blackmore, and Thomas Reed, the veterinary surgeon who had examined the first bodies and survived the final confrontation, were the only ones who knew the full truth, who had seen the beast, who understood what it was, and they never spoke of it, never published their findings, never tried to prove to the world that the beast was real, for they knew that no one would believe them, that the evidence would be destroyed, that the truth would be buried. And they carried their knowledge in silence, in fear, in the sure certainty that the beast was still out there, still hunting, still waiting, and that it would come for them eventually, would collect them, would consume them. And they lived their remaining years in the shadow of that knowledge, in the grip of that fear, in the understanding that their survival was temporary, conditional, subject to the whim of a creature that could have killed them at any time, and that eventually, inevitably, it would. The years that followed the Exmoor massacre were years of silence and denial, the authorities desperate to bury the truth, to dismiss the deaths as unrelated incidents, to attribute the mutilations to dogs or poachers or cult activity, anything but the reality of a large predator stalking the British countryside. And the files were sealed, the evidence destroyed, the witnesses silenced, and the beast was allowed to continue its hunt, allowed to feed, allowed to exist in the shadows, in the darkness, in the spaces between the official lies and the unofficial truth. Sarah Williams had left the police force, had left Devon, had left everything she knew and moved to London, to the anonymity of the city, to the safety of concrete and crowds and the absence of moorland, and she tried to forget, tried to move on, tried to live a normal life. But she could not escape the memories, could not escape the dreams, could not escape the certainty that the beast was still out there, still hunting, still waiting for her, and she took precautions, extreme precautions, never going out at night, never venturing into parks or green spaces, never allowing herself to be alone in darkness, and still she knew, still she waited, still she feared, for the beast was patient, was cunning, was eternal, and it would find her eventually, would collect her eventually, would consume her as it had consumed all the others. The second survivor, James Blackmore, had not been so fortunate, had not escaped, had not survived the aftermath, for the beast had marked him, had chosen him, had saved him for last, and it came for him on the anniversary of the massacre, on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, when its power was at its peak, when the darkness was deepest, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and it took him from his farmhouse, from his bed, from the place where he should have been safest, and his body was found the next morning in the center of his field, arranged in the pattern, hollowed and displayed. And the authorities called it murder, called it a cult killing, called it anything but the truth, but Sarah knew, she recognized the signs. She understood that the beast had collected its due, had completed its hunt, had finished what it started, and she knew that she was next, that Thomas Reed was next, that the three survivors were being eliminated one by one, and there was nothing she could do, no protection she could seek, no safety she could find, for the beast was not bound by walls or locks or distance, was not limited by the laws of nature or physics, was a force that could find her anywhere, anytime, any place. Thomas Reed, the veterinary surgeon, had tried to fight back, had tried to understand the creature, to find its weaknesses, to devise a method of killing it, and he had failed, his research destroyed, his notes stolen, his laboratory burned, and he had died in the fire, or so the authorities claimed, but Sarah knew the truth, knew that the beast had taken him, had silenced him, had eliminated the threat he represented, and now only she remained, the last survivor, the final witness, the only one who knew the full truth, and she waited for the end, prepared for the end, expected the end. And it came, but not as she expected, not as she feared, not as she imagined. The beast came to her in London, came through the city, through the streets, through the shadows, and it found her in her apartment, in her sanctuary, in the place where she had thought herself safe, and it stood before her in her living room in the darkness. And it did not attack, did not kill, did not consume her, but stood and watched and waited, and she understood then, understood what the others had not, what the beast wanted, what it needed, what it demanded, and she made her choice, made her decision, made her sacrifice. And she opened the window and stepped out and fell, and her death was ruled suicide, another victim of trauma, of depression, of the weight of memories too heavy to bear. But the truth was different. The truth was that she had been taken, claimed, collected by the beast, by the creature, by the thing that had marked her from the moment it spared her, and her death was not a surrender but an acceptance, not a defeat but a completion. And she joined the others in the darkness, in the memory, in the eternal hunt that was the beast's domain. The Beast of Exmoor continued to hunt, continued to kill, continued to stalk the moors and the farms and the villages of the countryside, and new victims fell, new deaths accumulated, new disappearances mounted, and the authorities covered them up, explained them away, buried the truth, and the beast fed and it grew, and it became more than a local legend, more than a regional monster, more than a British curiosity. And it spread through the countryside, through the nation, through the world, following the waterways, the game trails, the ancient paths that connected the wild places, and it found new territory, new prey, new victims, and the legend grew, and the fear spread, and the warnings multiplied, and those who heeded them lived, and those who ignored them died, and the beast fed, and the cycle continued. The researchers who studied the beast, who tried to understand it, who sought to capture or kill it, they failed, every one of them, their efforts ending in death, in destruction, in the addition of their bodies to the beast's collection. And the scientific community learned, eventually, to leave it alone, to stop asking questions, to stop seeking answers. And the beast was allowed to exist in the shadows, in the darkness, in the spaces between the known and the unknown, and it fed and it waited and it hungered. The final truth of the Beast of Exmoor was that it was not a single creature, not an individual animal, but a type, a species, a manifestation of the wild that could not be eradicated, could not be controlled, could not be defeated, and it would exist as long as there were wild places. As long as there was darkness, as long as there were humans who ventured into the night, who ignored the warnings, who thought themselves safe, and it would teach them, would show them, would kill them, and the hunt would continue forever and ever until the end of time. The Beast of Exmoor was not a panther, not a puma, not an escaped exotic pet, but something older, something wilder, something that had existed in Britain since before the Ice Ages, since before humans, since before time, and it had evolved, adapted, survived, becoming the perfect predator, the perfect killer, the perfect hunter, and it had waited in the shadows, in the darkness, in the deep places, until the modern world had provided it with new opportunities. New prey, new victims, and it had emerged, had begun to hunt, had begun to feed, and it would not stop, could not stop, would never stop, until the last human had been consumed, until the last wild place had been destroyed, until the last shadow had been banished by light. And even then, even in that impossible future, it would find a way to survive, to adapt, to continue. For the beast was eternal, the beast was forever, the beast was waiting. The survivors of the beast's attacks were few, and their stories were fragments, pieces of a larger truth that could never be fully assembled. And they carried their knowledge in silence, in fear, in the sure understanding that the beast was still watching, still waiting, still hungry, and they warned others when they could, when they were believed. When their warnings were heeded, and some lived because of them, and some died despite them, and the beast fed, and the legend grew, and the fear spread, and the moors remained dangerous, deadly, demonic, and the beast waited and watched and hungered for the next victim, the next meal, the next sacrifice to the eternal hunt. The first to die after the original massacre was a group of hikers, 5 young people from London who had come to Exmoor for the weekend, who had ignored the warnings, who had laughed at the stories of the beast, who had set up their camp on the moor, in the darkness, in the creature's territory, and they died together, their bodies found arranged in a circle. Their chests hollowed, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and surprise, and the authorities called it a cult killing, called it a mass murder, called it anything but the truth. But the locals knew, they recognized the signs. They understood that the beast had fed again, had hunted again, had claimed 5 more victims for its collection. The second group to die was a family, the Harrisons, who had bought a farm on the edge of the moor, who had moved from the city seeking a rural idyll, who had been warned by their neighbors, by the locals, by the old farmers who knew the truth, but who had not listened, who had dismissed the warnings as superstition, as ignorance, as the ramblings of old men, and the beast came for them on their first night. Came into their farmhouse, came into their beds, and killed them all, the father, the mother, the 2 children, and their bodies were found the next morning, arranged in the pattern displayed. And the authorities called it a home invasion, called it a robbery gone wrong, called it anything but the truth, but the beast had fed, had grown stronger, had claimed its territory and defended it against the intruders. The third group to die was a team of researchers, scientists from a university who had come to study the beast, to prove its existence, to capture it or kill it. And they had equipment, technology, weapons, and they had been confident, had been arrogant, had believed that their knowledge, their preparation, their resources would protect them. And the beast proved them wrong, took them one by one, hunted them through the moor, killed them in ways that demonstrated its intelligence, its cunning, its superiority over mere human technology, and their bodies were found scattered across the landscape, each one arranged in the pattern, each one hollowed and displayed, and their equipment was found undamaged, unfired, unused, for they had never had the chance to fight back, never had the chance to defend themselves, never had the chance to even see what was killing them. The pattern of the killings was clear to those who studied it, clear to those who collected the stories, clear to those who understood the truth. The beast was not just hunting for food, not just killing for survival, but was engaged in a ritual, a ceremony, a demonstration of power, of dominance, of ownership, and it marked its territory, marked its kills, marked its victims in ways that were unmistakable, undeniable, unmissable, and it waited between kills, waited for the fear to spread, waited for the stories to circulate, waited for the next group of fools to venture into its domain. And then it struck again, and again and again, and the body count mounted, and the legend grew, and the fear spread, and the beast fed, and the cycle continued. The survivors of the beast's attacks were marked, chosen, saved for purposes that were never fully understood, and they carried their survival like a burden, like a curse, like a debt that would eventually come due, and they lived their lives in the shadow of that knowledge, in the grip of that fear, in the certainty that the beast would return for them, would claim them, would complete what it had started, and they were right, every one of them. For the beast collected its debts, claimed its due, consumed its marked prey, and none escaped, not really, not permanently, not truly. The final confrontation between humanity and the Beast of Exmoor had not yet occurred, would not occur, could not occur, for the beast was not a single creature that could be fought, could be killed, could be defeated, but was a force of nature, a principle of predation, an aspect of the wild that would exist as long as there were wild places, as long as there was darkness, as long as there were humans who ventured into the night, and the hunt would continue. The killings would continue, the terror would continue until the end of time, until the last human had been consumed, until the last wild place had been destroyed, until the beast stood alone in the wilderness, the king of a dead world, the apex of nothing, the hunter with no prey. And even then, even in that final darkness, it would remember, it would dream. It would hunger, for the beast is eternal, the beast is forever, the beast is waiting, and it is waiting for you. The moors are not safe, the night is not safe, the wild places are not safe. The Beast of Exmoor is real, the beast is here, the beast is waiting, and it is hungry, so very, very hungry. And it will take you if you give it the chance, if you ignore the warnings, if you think yourself safe, and your death will not be merciful, will not be quick, will be drawn out over hours of agony and terror, and your body will be hollowed, your organs removed, your face frozen in an expression of transcendent horror, and you will become part of the legend, part of the story, part of the eternal feast, and the beast will smile. And the hunt will continue, and the moors will run red with your blood, and your screams will join the chorus of the damned, and no one will hear, no one will come, no one will save you, for the beast is the master here, is the apex here, is the god of this place, and you are merely food, merely prey, merely a meal to be consumed, and your life will end in the darkness, in the creature's belly, in the endless nightmare that is the beast's domain. The legacy of the Beast of Exmoor extended far beyond the immediate victims, far beyond the direct survivors, far beyond the geographic boundaries of the moor itself. For the creature was not bound to Exmoor, not limited to Devon and Somerset, but was a manifestation of the wild that existed wherever there were wild places. Wherever there was darkness, wherever there were humans who ventured into the night, and it traveled, moved, migrated, following the ancient pathways, the ley lines, the geographic features that connected the sacred places, the wild places, the places where humans had not yet conquered, and it found new territories, new victims, new prey. And the legend spread, grew, multiplied, until the Beast of Exmoor became the Beast of Dartmoor, the Beast of Bodmin, the Beast of the Highlands, the beast of every wild place in Britain, in Europe, in the world, and the killings continued. The deaths mounted, the survivors accumulated, and the truth became impossible to hide. Impossible to deny, impossible to dismiss, though the authorities tried, though they covered up, though they buried the evidence and silenced the witnesses. The truth leaked out, spread, grew, until everyone knew, everyone feared. Everyone understood that something ancient and terrible was hunting them, was watching them, was waiting for them. The beast's methodology evolved over time, adapted to changing circumstances, learned from each encounter, each kill, each survivor, and it became more cunning, more patient, more selective, choosing its victims carefully, marking them, saving them, collecting them when the time was right. And it developed rituals, patterns, behaviors that were almost human, almost cultural, almost religious, and the experts who studied it, who survived it, who understood it, they spoke of intelligence, of consciousness, of something that was not merely animal but was something more, something else, something that existed on the boundary between the natural and the supernatural, between the physical and the spiritual, between the known and the unknown. The 3 survivors of the original Exmoor incident were dead, their stories lost, their warnings unheeded, but new survivors emerged, new witnesses who had seen the creature and lived to tell the tale, however briefly, however traumatically, and they carried the truth forward, passed it to the next generation, planted the seeds of fear that would grow into the legends, the myths, the warnings that might save lives, might prevent deaths, might keep the next group of fools from venturing into the darkness. And some of these warnings were heeded, some of these stories were believed, some of these lessons were learned, and people survived, people avoided the moors, people respected the danger, and the beast was forced to hunt elsewhere, to find new territories, new victims, new prey, and it spread through the countryside, through the nation, through the world, and the legend grew, and the fear spread, and the warnings multiplied. The scientific study of the beast was impossible, for the creature defied categorization, defied understanding, defied the laws of nature and physics and biology that govern the known world. And those who tried to study it, to capture it, to prove its existence, they died, their research destroyed, their evidence lost, their bodies feeding the hunger, and the scientific community learned, eventually, to leave it alone, to stop asking questions, to stop seeking answers, and the beast was allowed to exist in the shadows, in the darkness, in the spaces between the known and the unknown, and it fed and it grew, and it waited. The final truth of the Beast of Exmoor was that it was not a single creature, not an individual animal, but a type, a species, a manifestation of the wild that could not be eradicated, could not be controlled, could not be defeated, and it would exist as long as there were wild places. As long as there was darkness, as long as there were humans who ventured into the night, who ignored the warnings, who thought themselves safe, and it would teach them, would show them, would kill them, and the hunt would continue forever and ever until the end of time. The Beast of Exmoor was not a panther, not a puma, not an escaped exotic pet, but something older, something wilder, something that had existed in Britain since before the Ice Ages, since before humans, since before time, and it had evolved, adapted, survived, becoming the perfect predator, the perfect killer, the perfect hunter, and it had waited in the shadows, in the darkness, in the deep places, until the modern world had provided it with new opportunities. New prey, new victims, and it had emerged, had begun to hunt, had begun to feed, and it would not stop, could not stop, would never stop, until the last human had been consumed, until the last wild place had been destroyed, until the last shadow had been banished by light. And even then, even in that impossible future, it would find a way to survive, to adapt, to continue. For the beast was eternal, the beast was forever, the beast was waiting. The survivors of the beast's attacks were few, and their stories were fragments, pieces of a larger truth that could never be fully assembled. And they carried their knowledge in silence, in fear, in the sure understanding that the beast was still watching, still waiting, still hungry, and they warned others when they could, when they were believed. When their warnings were heeded, and some lived because of them, and some died despite them. And the beast fed, and the legend grew, and the fear spread. And the moors remained dangerous, deadly, demonic, and the beast waited and watched and hungered for the next victim, the next meal, the next sacrifice to the eternal hunt. The first victim after the original massacre was a shepherd, old Tom Blackwell, who had worked the moors for 50 years, who knew the land, who understood the dangers, who had seen the beast once years ago, and survived, and he thought he was safe, thought he was protected, thought his knowledge, his experience, His respect for the creature would keep him alive. And he was wrong. The beast came for him on a night in November. Came silently, came quickly. Came with a precision that suggested intelligence, awareness, memory, and his body was found the next morning, arranged in the pattern, hollowed and displayed. And the authorities called it a predator attack, called it a tragic accident, called it anything but the truth. But the locals knew, they recognized the signs. They understood that the beast had collected an old debt, had claimed a marked prey, had completed a hunt that had begun years before. The second victim was a child, young Emily Watson, who had wandered from her family's picnic, who had strayed too far from safety, who had gone into the bracken, into the darkness, into the beast's territory, and her parents heard the scream, heard the sudden silence, heard the sound of something moving through the undergrowth. And they found her body an hour later, arranged in the pattern, displayed, hollowed, and the authorities called it a kidnapping, called it a murder, called it anything but the truth. But the beast had fed again, had hunted again, had claimed another victim for its collection. The third victim was a policeman, Constable David Reed, who had been assigned to patrol the moor to protect the public, to hunt the beast, and he had been confident, had been armed, had been prepared, and the beast proved him wrong, took him from his vehicle, from the road, from the place where he should have been safest, and his body was found the next morning. Arranged in the pattern, displayed, and his weapon was unfired, his radio untouched, his vehicle intact, and the authorities called it a disappearance, called it an unsolved mystery, called it anything but the truth. But the beast had fed again, had demonstrated its superiority over human technology, human preparation, human arrogance. The pattern continued, the killings continued, the deaths accumulated, and the authorities continued to cover them up, to explain them away, to bury the truth, and the beast fed, and it grew. And it became stronger, more cunning, more patient, and it waited for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right victim, and the hunt continued, eternal and unending. The final warning is this: do not go into the moors at night. Do not venture into the wild places alone. Do not ignore the signs, the mutilated livestock, the disappearances, the feeling of being watched. The Beast of Exmoor is real. The beast is here. The beast is waiting, and it is hungry, so very, very hungry. And it will take you if you give it the chance, if you ignore the warnings, if you think yourself safe. And your death will not be merciful, will not be quick, will be drawn out over hours of agony and terror, and your body will be hollowed, your organs removed, your face frozen in an expression of transcendent horror, and you will become part of the legend, part of the story, part of the eternal feast. And the beast will smile, and the hunt will continue, and the moors will run red with your blood, and your screams will join the chorus of the damned, and no one will hear, no one will come, no one will save you. For the beast is the master here, is the apex here, is the god of this place, and you are merely food, merely prey, merely a meal to be consumed, and your life will end in the darkness. In the creature's belly, in the endless nightmare that is the beast's domain, and your story will be buried, your truth hidden, your death explained away, and the beast will wait and watch and hunger for the next victim, the next meal, the next sacrifice to the eternal hunt. And the cycle will continue as it has always continued, as it will always continue. Until the stars burn out and the earth turns cold, until the last human has been consumed, until the beast stands alone in the wilderness, the king of a dead world, the apex of nothing, the hunter with no prey. And even then, even in that final darkness, it will remember, it will dream, it will hunger, for the beast is eternal, the beast is forever, the beast is waiting, and it is waiting for you. The history of the Beast of Exmoor stretched back thousands of years, back to a time before humans had built their cities and roads and farms, back to when the moors were truly wild, truly empty, truly the domain of the creatures that had evolved to hunt, to kill, to survive in the harsh landscape of ancient Britain. And the beast was one of these creatures, a survivor, a predator, an apex hunter that had outlasted the ice ages, the climate changes, the arrival of humanity, and it had adapted, evolved, become something more than animal. Something that approached intelligence, consciousness, culture, and it had developed rituals, behaviors, traditions that were passed down through generations, through the long lineage of beasts that had hunted these moors, and it remembered, in its way, the humans who had come before. The ancient peoples who had respected it, feared it, worshipped it, and it remembered too those who had tried to kill it, to drive it out, to claim the land for themselves, and it had killed them, consumed them, added their bones to the collection that marked its territory. The archaeological evidence of the beast's existence was buried deep in the peat, in the bogs, in the places where the earth had preserved what time should have destroyed, and the archaeologists who excavated these sites, who found the bones, the tools, the remains of ancient settlements, they found evidence that they could not explain, could not understand, could not fit into their theories of human history, evidence of massive predators, of creatures that should not have existed, of killings that suggested not animal behavior but something more deliberate, more intelligent, more cruel, and they buried this evidence, hid it, destroyed it, for it threatened the established order, the accepted narrative, the comfortable belief that humans had always been the apex, the masters, the conquerors, and the beast waited and watched and smiled with its terrible fangs. The first recorded encounter with the beast in modern times was in 1903, when a farmer named William Harker reported losing sheep to a creature he described as a massive black cat, larger than any dog, larger than any legitimate British animal, and he had tried to hunt it, had set traps, had waited in the darkness with his rifle. And the beast had taken him instead, had killed him, had arranged his body in the pattern that would become its signature, and the authorities called it a wolf attack, called it a bear escape from a traveling menagerie, called it anything but the truth, and the beast had claimed its first modern victim, had established its territory, had begun its hunt anew. The killings continued through the decades, through the wars, through the changes that transformed Britain from an agricultural society to an industrial one to a modern technological civilization. And the beast adapted, evolved, learned to avoid the new dangers, to exploit the new opportunities, to hunt the new prey that humans provided. And it became legend, myth, story, warning, and those who heard the stories and heeded them lived, and those who ignored them died, and the beast fed, and the cycle continued. The 3 survivors of the 1983 massacre were dead, but their legacy lived on in the fear they had spread, the warnings they had given, the truth they had tried to share, and new survivors emerged, new witnesses who had seen the creature and lived to tell the tale, however briefly, however traumatically. And they added their voices to the chorus, their stories to the collection, their warnings to the legacy, and the beast watched and it waited. And it smiled with its terrible fangs, for it understood that fear was its greatest ally, its most effective hunting tool, its most reliable way of drawing prey into its domain, for humans were drawn to what they feared, were fascinated by what they did not understand, were compelled to investigate, to explore, to challenge the darkness. And the beast used this, exploited this, fed on this. And the cycle continued, the hunt continued, the feast continued, eternal and unending. The researchers who tried to document the beast, to prove its existence, to capture it on film, they failed, every one of them, their cameras destroyed, their footage lost, their evidence dismissed as hoaxes, as mistakes, as the products of overactive imaginations, and those who pushed too hard, who got too close, who tried to capture the beast rather than merely observe it, they died, their bodies added to the collection, their deaths explained away as accidents, as disappearances, as unsolved mysteries, and the beast continued to hunt, continued to kill, continued to exist in the shadows, in the darkness, in the spaces between the known and the unknown. The final truth of the Beast of Exmoor was that it was not merely a physical creature, not merely an animal, but was something more, something that existed in the spaces between worlds, between dimensions, between the natural and the supernatural, and it could appear where it wished, when it wished, could manifest in places where no wild animal should be, could find its prey wherever they hid, whatever walls they built, whatever locks they used. And this made it truly terrifying, truly inescapable, truly inevitable. And those who understood this, who accepted this, who recognized the beast for what it was, they had a chance, a slim chance, a desperate chance to survive, to avoid, to respect the boundaries that the beast marked. And those who did not, who thought themselves safe, who believed in the protection of walls and locks and distance, they died, they fed the hunger, they became part of the legend. The moors are not safe. The night is not safe. The wild places are not safe. The Beast of Exmoor is real. The beast is here. The beast is waiting, and it is hungry, so very, very hungry. The survivors of the beast's attacks were marked, chosen, saved for purposes that were never fully understood, and they carried their survival like a burden, like a curse, like a debt that would eventually come due, and they lived their remaining years in fear, in preparation, in the desperate hope that they might be spared, might be forgotten, might be allowed to live out their natural span. But deep down, in the primitive part of their minds that the beast spoke to, that the beast hunted through, they knew the truth, knew that they were marked, chosen, claimed, and that the creature would come for them when it was ready, when it was hungry, when it was time, and they would join the others in the darkness, in the memory, in the eternal hunt that was the beast's domain. Sarah Williams had understood this, had accepted this, had made her peace with this, and her death, though ruled suicide, was in truth a sacrifice, an offering, a completion of the ritual that the beast had begun years before, and she had given herself willingly, had stepped out of the window, had fallen to her death, and in her final moments she had seen the beast, had seen it waiting below, had seen it smile with its terrible fangs, and she had known that her choice was not a surrender but a completion. Not a defeat but a victory, for she had denied the beast the pleasure of the hunt, the joy of the chase, the satisfaction of the kill, and she had died on her own terms, if not by her own hand, and the beast had claimed her body, had arranged it, had added it to its collection. But it had been denied her fear, her terror, her suffering, and this was the only victory that humans could ever achieve against the beast, the only way to defeat it, to deny it what it wanted, what it needed, what it demanded. James Blackmore had not understood this, had fought to the end, had tried to survive, to escape, to defeat the beast, and his death had been terrible, had been prolonged, had been filled with the agony and terror that the beast fed on, and his body had been found in the center of his field, arranged in the pattern, hollowed and displayed. And the authorities had called it murder, had called it a cult killing, had called it anything but the truth, but the beast had fed well that night, had feasted on Blackmore's fear, his suffering, his desperate hope for survival, and it had grown stronger, more cunning, more patient, and it had waited for the next victim, the next meal, the next sacrifice. Thomas Reed had tried to understand the beast, to study it, to find its weaknesses, and he had discovered something, had learned something, had uncovered a truth that had cost him his life, and his laboratory had burned, his notes destroyed, his research lost, and no one would ever know what he had found, what he had learned. What he had discovered about the beast's nature, its origins, its purpose, and the beast had silenced him, had eliminated the threat he represented, had ensured that his knowledge would die with him, and the truth had been buried, hidden, destroyed, and the beast continued to hunt, continued to kill, continued to wait in the darkness. The 3 survivors were dead, but new survivors emerged, new witnesses who had seen the beast and lived to tell the tale, and they carried the truth forward, passed it to the next generation, planted the seeds of fear that would grow into the legends, the myths, the warnings that might save lives, might prevent deaths, might keep the next group of fools from venturing into the darkness. And some heeded these warnings, some believed these stories, some learned these lessons and they lived, and the beast was forced to hunt elsewhere, to find new territories, new victims, new prey, and it spread through the countryside, through the nation, through the world, and the legend grew and the fear spread, and the warnings multiplied, and the hunt continued, eternal and unending. The Beast of Exmoor was not a single creature, but a manifestation, a principle, a force of nature that could appear wherever there were wild places, wherever there was darkness, wherever there were humans who ventured into the night, and it could not be killed, could not be trapped, could not be defeated, for it was eternal, unkillable, unstoppable, and it would exist as long as there were humans to hunt, as long as there were wild places to haunt, as long as there was darkness to hide in. And it would feed, and it would grow, and it would wait, and it would be there when the last human fell, when the last light went out, when the last hope was extinguished, and it would stand alone in the darkness, the king of a dead world, the apex of nothing, the hunter with no prey. And even then, even in that final moment, it would remember, it would dream, it would hunger, for the beast was eternal, the beast was forever, the beast was waiting, and it was waiting for you. The moors are not safe. The night is not safe. The wild places are not safe. The Beast of Exmoor is real. The beast is here. The beast is waiting, and it is hungry, so very, very hungry. And it will take you if you give it the chance, if you ignore the warnings, if you think yourself safe. And your death will not be merciful, will not be quick, will be drawn out over hours of agony and terror, and your body will be hollowed, your organs removed, your face frozen in an expression of transcendent horror, and you will become part of the legend, part of the story, part of the eternal feast. And the beast will smile, and the hunt will continue, and the moors will run red with your blood, and your screams will join the chorus of the damned, and no one will hear, no one will come, no one will save you. For the beast is the master here, is the apex here, is the god of this place, and you are merely food, merely prey, merely a meal to be consumed, and your life will end in the darkness. In the creature's belly, in the endless nightmare that is the beast's domain, and your story will be buried, your truth hidden, your death explained away, and the beast will wait and watch and hunger for the next victim, the next meal, the next sacrifice to the eternal hunt. And the cycle will continue as it has always continued, as it will always continue. Until the stars burn out and the earth turns cold, until the last human has been consumed, until the beast stands alone in the wilderness, the king of a dead world, the apex of nothing, the hunter with no prey. And even then, even in that final darkness, it will remember, it will dream, it will hunger, for the beast is eternal, the beast is forever, the beast is waiting, and it is waiting for you. The final accounting of the beast's victims would never be complete, could never be complete, for the creature had hunted for thousands of years before written records existed, and would hunt for thousands more after the last record was destroyed, and the only true accounting was written in the bones that littered the moors, in the skulls that decorated its lairs, in the memories of fear that it planted in every generation. And those who encountered it and survived carried the truth with them, passed it on, warned others, and some heeded these warnings and lived, and some ignored them and died, and the beast fed, and the cycle continued, eternal and unending. The Beast of Exmoor was not a legend, not a myth, not a misidentified dog or cat or escaped exotic pet, but the true apex predator of the British countryside, the ancient hunter that had outlasted civilizations, outlasted empires, outlasted the very concept of human dominion, and it would outlast the current civilization, the current empire, the current delusion that humans were the masters of the world. And it would be there when the cities fell, when the walls crumbled, when the last human died, and it would hunt again and feed again, and teach again the lesson that humans most needed to learn, that they were not the apex, not the masters, not the chosen, but merely prey, merely food, merely temporary visitors in a world that belonged to older and hungrier things. The moors are deep, the night is dark, and the beast is waiting. Do not go into the wild places. Do not seek the creature. Do not tempt the ancient hunger that lives in the shadows, for it will find you, and it will take you, and you will never be seen again. Only your bones will remain. Your skull will watch from its place in the beast's collection, and the beast will smile, and the hunt will continue, forever and ever until the end of time. The Mothman of Point Pleasant. Chapter 1. The Red Eyes in the Dark. The town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, had always been a place of quiet obscurity, a small community nestled along the banks of the Ohio River where nothing particularly remarkable ever seemed to happen. That was, until the autumn of 1967, when everything changed. When the darkness that had been lying dormant in the hills and forests surrounding the town finally stirred, stretched its wings, and descended upon the unsuspecting populace with an appetite for destruction that would leave the town forever scarred. I had come to Point Pleasant as part of a research group from Marshall University, studying local folklore and urban legends for a thesis project. There were 8 of us in total: myself, David Chen, our group leader and folklore professor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an anthropologist specializing in cryptid mythology, Marcus Webb, a graduate student in psychology, Jennifer Walsh, a journalism major, Thomas O'Brien, a local historian, Rebecca Torres, a photography student, Daniel Park, my roommate and fellow folklore enthusiast, and Emily Foster, Sarah's research assistant. We had rented a small cabin on the outskirts of town, near the TNT area, hoping to gather first-hand accounts of the so-called Mothman sightings that had been reported with increasing frequency over the past several months. The cabin was an old wooden structure, weathered by decades of exposure to the humid West Virginia climate, with a sagging porch and windows that rattled whenever the wind picked up. It sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with only the narrow path leading back toward town providing any sense of connection to the outside world. The isolation had seemed romantic when we first arrived, an authentic experience that would put us in the right frame of mind to investigate the legends. Within 48 hours, that isolation would become a death trap. We arrived on Friday evening, just as the sun was beginning to set behind the tree line. The autumn air was crisp and carried the scent of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke. David had arranged for us to meet with several locals who claimed to have seen the creature, interviews scheduled for Saturday morning. That first night was spent unpacking our equipment, setting up the cameras and audio recorders, and debating the merits of various cryptid theories over bottles of cheap wine that Thomas had brought from his personal collection. I remember the conversation vividly, though now it seems like something from another lifetime. We sat in the cabin's main room, the fireplace crackling and casting dancing shadows across the walls, while outside the darkness pressed against the windows like something alive and curious. Marcus was arguing that the sightings could be explained by mass hysteria, a psychological phenomenon triggered by the stress of modern life and the power of suggestion. Sarah countered with accounts from seemingly credible witnesses, people with nothing to gain from their testimony who had been genuinely terrified by what they saw. "There's a consistency to the descriptions," she said, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "The red eyes, the massive wings, the way it seems to glide without flapping. These aren't random hallucinations. Something is out there." Thomas nodded solemnly, his weathered face creasing with concern. "My grandfather saw it," he said quietly. "Back in '52, before any of the official reports. He was hunting in the woods north of town when something dropped from the sky and landed not 20 feet from him. Said it was bigger than a man, with eyes that glowed like burning coals. He ran and never went back into those woods, died with the fear still in him." Jennifer was taking notes furiously, her pen scratching across the pages of her notebook. "When did the modern sightings begin?" she asked. "November of last year," Thomas replied. "2 young couples were out near the TNT area, the old World War II munitions plant. They were in a car, doing what young couples do in cars at night when they saw something huge and gray rise up in front of them. Said it had glowing red eyes and chased them for miles. That's when it started. Since then, dozens of people have reported seeing it." I poured myself another glass of wine, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease that had been building since sunset. The woods around the cabin had grown unnaturally quiet, the usual sounds of crickets and night birds replaced by a silence that felt heavy and oppressive. I mentioned this to Daniel, but he dismissed it as my imagination, the power of suggestion that Marcus had been talking about. We talked late into the night, eventually drifting off to our various sleeping arrangements. David and Sarah had the main bedroom, while the rest of us made do with sleeping bags and air mattresses in the living room. I chose a spot near the window, drawn by some morbid fascination with the darkness outside. I told myself it was for the fresh air, but really I was hoping to see something. I wanted to believe that there were still mysteries in the world, still things that science couldn't explain. I wish I could go back to that night and tell myself to run, to gather my things and drive as far away from Point Pleasant as possible. But I didn't, and that decision would haunt me for the rest of my life. The first sighting came at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I had been staring at my watch, unable to sleep, counting the minutes until dawn. The window beside me looked out onto the side yard of the cabin, where the trees began their encroachment on the clearing. The moon was full that night, casting silver light through the branches, creating patterns of shadow and illumination that shifted and danced with every breath of wind. At first I thought it was a deer. Something tall and thin was standing at the tree line, partially obscured by the trunks of two massive oaks. It was the height that caught my attention, the way it seemed to tower over the underbrush that would have hidden a normal animal. Then I saw the eyes. They were not the reflective shine of a nocturnal animal caught in moonlight. They were not the glowing orbs of a cat or a deer. These were something else entirely. 2 points of crimson light, each one larger than a dinner plate, set low on what I assumed was the creature's head. They glowed with an internal luminescence that seemed to pulse with a rhythm like a heartbeat, or perhaps like the beating of massive wings. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The eyes were staring directly at me, I was certain of it, even though the distance was too great for me to make out any other features. But I could feel the weight of that gaze, the intelligence behind it, the hunger. It knew I was there. It had been watching us since we arrived. "Hey," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Hey guys, there's something outside." No one responded. The others were deep in sleep, their breathing rhythmic and peaceful. I didn't want to shout, didn't want to wake them up if I was just seeing things, if the wine and the atmosphere had gotten to me. But those eyes, those terrible, hypnotic red eyes. The creature shifted, and I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A wing. A massive, leathery appendage that unfurled from the darkness and stretched outward, spanning what must have been 10 feet or more. It was like a bat's wing, but impossibly large, impossibly wrong. The membrane caught the moonlight as it extended, and I could see the skeletal structure beneath, the fingers that stretched the skin taut. Then it moved. Not walking, not running, but gliding. The creature took a single step forward and then launched itself into the air, those massive wings catching air with a sound like a sail snapping in a strong wind. It rose straight up, just as the legend said, ascending vertically like a helicopter until it was silhouetted against the moon. For a moment it hung there, a dark shape against the silver light, and then it was gone, vanished into the night with a speed that defied physics. I sat there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs, wondering if I had really seen what I thought I saw. When I finally worked up the courage to wake the others, I found that the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I had witnessed? How could I make them understand that something ancient and terrible had been watching us, marking us for reasons I couldn't comprehend? I kept the sighting to myself that night, telling myself I would report it in the morning when I had calmed down. But morning brought its own revelations, and my personal encounter would soon become the least of our worries. Saturday dawned gray and overcast, the sky pressing down on the town like a physical weight. We had scheduled interviews with 3 witnesses throughout the day, starting with a farmer named Jedediah Crow who lived on the outskirts of the TNT area. His farm was the closest inhabited property to the abandoned munitions plant, and he had reported multiple sightings over the past 3 months. The drive to Crow's farm took us along winding roads that cut through dense forest, the trees leaning over the pavement like sentinels guarding some forbidden realm. The atmosphere was oppressive, the cloud cover creating a twilight gloom even at mid-morning. We saw no other vehicles, passed no other houses. It was as if the town had been evacuated overnight, leaving only us and whatever lurked in the woods. Jedediah Crow was a man in his 60s, with the weathered skin and gnarled hands of someone who had spent his entire life working the land. He met us at the door of his farmhouse with a shotgun cradled in his arms, his eyes darting constantly to the tree line as if expecting an attack at any moment. His wife, a silent woman with haunted eyes, served us coffee while Crow told his story. "First time I seen it was back in August," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I was out checkin' on my cattle round dusk when I heard this sound like something big movin' through the air. I looked up and there it was, sittin' on the roof of my barn, big as a man but with wings like a devil, and them eyes. God help me, them eyes." He shuddered visibly, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "It didn't do nothin', just sat there starin' at me. Then it opened them wings and flew off toward the TNT area. I found 3 of my cattle dead the next mornin'. No marks on 'em, no blood, just dead. Like something had sucked the life right out of 'em." Dr. Mitchell was taking notes, her professional demeanor masking what I could tell was genuine concern. "Have you seen it since?" she asked. Crow nodded grimly. 12 times, each time something dies, my cattle, my dogs, wild animals in the woods, and each time it gets closer. Last week it was on my porch roof. I could hear it moving around up there, scratching at the shingles. I didn't sleep for 3 days. He leaned forward, his eyes wild. "You folks are fools for common out here. That thing ain't no animal, it's something else. Something that came here for a reason, and whatever that reason is, it ain't good." We left Crow's farm with a sense of growing dread that none of us wanted to acknowledge. The second interview was with a young couple, Roger and Linda Mercer, who had seen the creature while driving on Route 62 3 weeks prior. Their account matched the classic Mothman description perfectly. The creature had swooped down from the trees, its red eyes reflecting in their headlights, and chased their car for nearly a mile before veering off into the darkness. "It was fast," Linda said, her voice trembling. "So fast. We were doing 60 miles an hour and it was keeping pace, just gliding alongside us. I thought we were going to die. I really thought we were going to die." The third interview was with an elderly woman named Agnes Thompson, a self-proclaimed psychic who claimed to have communicated with the creature through her dreams. Her account was more bizarre than the others, filled with references to prophecies and impending doom, but there was something in her demeanor that made me believe she was telling the truth as she saw it. "It comes before tragedy," she said, her milky eyes seeming to stare through us. "It is drawn to death like a moth to flame. The bridge will fall, many will die. I have seen it in my visions." When we asked which bridge she was referring to, she only shook her head. "You will know when it happens, but know this, those who see the Mothman are marked. It knows your names now. It will not forget." We returned to the cabin as evening approached, the sky darkening earlier than it should have, the clouds growing heavier with the threat of rain. The atmosphere in the car was tense, everyone processing the interviews in their own way. David was excited, seeing confirmation of the legend in the consistency of the accounts. Sarah was concerned, noting the psychological toll the sightings were taking on the witnesses. The rest of us were simply afraid. That night, we decided to split up for surveillance. David and Sarah would remain at the cabin, monitoring the radio for any reports. Marcus and Jennifer would take one of the cars and patrol the roads near the TNT area. Thomas, Rebecca, Daniel and I would take the other car and check out the abandoned munitions plant itself, hoping to gather evidence of the creature's presence. The TNT area was a sprawling complex of abandoned concrete structures, built during World War II for the manufacture of explosives, and abandoned shortly after the war ended. The buildings were crumbling now, overtaken by vegetation, with only the concrete igloos remaining relatively intact. The area had a bad reputation locally, with stories of strange lights and unusual animal behavior predating the Mothman sightings by decades. We parked the car at the entrance to the complex, the headlights illuminating the overgrown road that led into the heart of the facility. Thomas had brought a flashlight and a camera, while Rebecca carried her photography equipment in hopes of capturing something on film. Daniel and I were armed only with our notebooks and a growing sense of unease. "This place gives me the creeps," Daniel said as we stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something sulfurous and wrong. "It feels like we're being watched." He was right. The sensation of being observed was overwhelming, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against us from all directions. The trees around the complex were unnaturally still, their branches hanging limp despite the breeze we could feel on our faces. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We made our way down the road, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The concrete igloos loomed ahead, their curved roofs silhouetted against the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, we could hear the sound of something moving through the underbrush, something large and deliberate. "Probably just a deer," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. We reached the first igloo, its entrance a black maw that seemed to drink the light from our flashlights. Rebecca set up her camera on a tripod, pointing it at the structure while she prepared the flash attachment. Thomas was examining the ground near the entrance, looking for tracks. "These are too big for any animal native to the area," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "Look at the size of these prints, and the shape. They're almost human, but the toes are wrong, too long, and there are claw marks." Daniel and I crowded around to see. The prints were indeed strange, pressed deep into the soft earth by a creature of considerable weight. They led away from the igloo, heading deeper into the complex, and from the freshness of the impressions, they had been made recently. "We should follow them," Thomas said, already moving after the tracks. "This could be the evidence we need." I should have stopped him. I should have insisted we return to the car, return to the cabin, return to civilization where the darkness was kept at bay by streetlights and the comfort of other people. But I didn't. The same morbid curiosity that had drawn me to Point Pleasant in the first place now propelled me forward, deeper into the nightmare. The tracks led us through the complex, past the crumbling administration building and the collapsed storage sheds, toward the far end of the facility where the tree line pressed closest to the abandoned structures. The moon had risen while we were walking, breaking through the clouds and casting everything in silver light. The shadows were deeper now, black pools of darkness that seemed to move and shift with malevolent intent. It was Rebecca who saw it first. She had been adjusting her camera settings, preparing for a long exposure shot, when she looked up and froze. Her scream was cut off by her own hand clamping over her mouth, but the sound she made was enough to stop us all in our tracks. "There," she whispered, pointing with a trembling finger toward the roof of the largest igloo, the structure that had once served as the main assembly building. It was perched on the curved concrete, silhouetted against the moon, and even at this distance I could see that the legends had not done it justice. The creature was massive, far larger than any of the witnesses had described. It stood upright like a man, but its proportions were all wrong, too slender, too elongated. Its arms hung almost to its knees, ending in clawed hands that gripped the concrete with inhuman strength. And its wings, God, those wings! They were folded against its back now, but even furled they were enormous, draping down like a cloak of shadows. But it was the eyes that held us paralyzed. Two blazing points of crimson light, set low on a head that seemed to blend seamlessly into its torso, with no visible neck to separate them. Those eyes were looking directly at us, and in them I saw ancient hunger, malevolent intelligence, and something worse. I saw recognition. It knew we were there. It had been waiting for us. "Don't move," Thomas whispered, but his advice was unnecessary. None of us could have moved if we had wanted to. The creature's gaze held us pinned, our muscles locked in terror. Then it opened its wings. The sound was like thunder, a crack that echoed across the complex and sent birds erupting from the trees in panic. The wingspan was enormous, at least 12 feet from tip to tip, and the membrane caught the moonlight, revealing a network of veins and sinew that pulsed with inner light. The creature dropped from the roof, not falling but gliding, descending in a spiral that brought it closer and closer to where we stood. Thomas raised his camera and fired off a shot, the flash illuminating the creature for a fraction of a second. In that brief burst of light, I saw details that would haunt my dreams forever. The skin, if it could be called that, was gray and smooth, like polished stone. The face, if it had one, was a blank oval dominated by those terrible eyes. And the mouth, opening now in a scream that wasn't sound but rather a pressure inside my skull, was a cavern of needle-like teeth. "Run," Daniel shouted, and the spell was broken. We ran. God help us, we ran. Thomas stumbled, his camera falling from his hands, and Rebecca grabbed him, pulling him forward. I could hear the creature behind us, the sound of its wings beating the air, the rush of displaced wind as it pursued. It wasn't flying, wasn't gliding, but somehow keeping pace with us, herding us, driving us toward some destination of its choosing. We reached the car and piled in, Thomas fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely insert them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he slammed the accelerator, the tires spinning on the gravel before catching and launching us forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing in the road where we had been moments before, its wings spread wide, its eyes burning like coals. It didn't follow. It just watched us go, and in that watching I understood. It wasn't finished with us. This was only the beginning. We didn't speak on the drive back to the cabin. There was nothing to say. We had seen it. The Mothman was real. And now that it knew us, now that it had marked us, there would be no escape from the horror that was to come. When we arrived at the cabin, we found David and Sarah huddled together, the radio crackling with static. They looked at our faces and knew immediately that something had happened. We told them everything, our words tumbling over each other in our haste to get the story out. Thomas showed them the single photograph he had managed to take, the image blurred and overexposed, but unmistakably showing a dark shape with glowing red eyes. Marcus and Jennifer returned an hour later, their faces pale, their hands trembling. They had seen it too, they said. While patrolling the roads near the TNT area, the creature had swooped down from the trees and landed on the hood of their car. It had stared at them through the windshield, its eyes hypnotic and terrible, before launching back into the air and disappearing. "It was like it was studying us," Jennifer said, her voice hollow, "like it was trying to decide something." That night we barricaded ourselves in the cabin. We pushed furniture against the doors, covered the windows with blankets, and sat together in the living room, no one willing to sleep. The atmosphere was thick with fear, and the knowledge that we had crossed some threshold, entered a realm where the rules of normal reality no longer applied. I sat by the window again, though this time I kept the curtains drawn. Through the fabric I could see the glow of the moon, and beyond it the shadows of the trees. I knew it was out there. I could feel it, a presence pressing against my consciousness like a physical weight. It was waiting. It was patient. It had all the time in the world. The clock on the mantel ticked away the hours, each minute an eternity. At 2:47 a.m., exactly 24 hours after my first sighting, I heard the sound. It was the beating of wings, massive and rhythmic, coming from somewhere above the cabin. The sound grew louder, then softer, as if the creature was circling, examining the structure from every angle. Then it landed. The impact shook the entire cabin, sending dust raining down from the ceiling beams. Something heavy moved across the roof, claws scratching against the shingles, and I heard the sound of sniffing like a dog tracking a scent. It was searching for us. It knew we were inside. "Nobody move," David whispered, his face white as paper. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise had been, a pregnant stillness that seemed to promise violence. A face appeared at the window. I didn't see it, but I felt it, the presence of those eyes pressing against the glass. The curtains rippled as if touched by a breeze, though the air was perfectly still. And then, impossibly, I heard a voice inside my mind, not words but feelings, images of destruction and death, the bridge and the water and the bodies floating in the darkness. The face vanished, the presence withdrew, but the message remained, burned into my consciousness like a brand. The Mothman had shown me the future. It had shown me death on a scale I could barely comprehend, and it had marked me as the one who would survive to tell the tale. I didn't understand then what it meant. I wouldn't understand until it was too late. But as dawn finally broke over the horizon, casting pale light through the cracks in the curtains, I knew that the worst was yet to come. The Mothman had chosen its victims. Now it was time for the killing to begin. Chapter 2: First Blood. Sunday dawned with a sky the color of old bruises, purple and yellow and sickly green, as if the atmosphere itself was infected with the same rot that had settled over our souls. None of us had slept. How could we, after what we had seen, after what had come to us in the night? We sat in the living room like survivors of some terrible battle, though the war had barely begun. David was the first to move, his academic instincts overriding his fear. He began organizing our evidence, the photographs and notes and recordings, trying to make sense of what was happening to us. "We need to document everything," he said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "This is unprecedented. We have confirmed visual contact with an unknown species. This could be the discovery of the century." "This isn't a scientific specimen, David," Sarah said quietly. She hadn't stopped trembling since we returned from the TNT area. "This is something else, something that shouldn't exist, and it's hunting us." Marcus tried to make contact with the outside world, but the phone lines were dead. The storm that had been threatening since yesterday had finally broken, and the rain was coming down in sheets that turned the dirt road to mud and made driving impossible. We were trapped. The creature had chosen its moment well. "We'll wait until the rain lets up," Thomas said, though he didn't sound convinced of his own words. "Then we'll drive to town, report this to the sheriff." "And tell him what?" Jennifer asked, her voice rising toward hysteria. "That we're being hunted by a giant moth monster. He'll think we're crazy, or he'll think we're on drugs. Either way, he won't help us." "We have the photograph," Thomas insisted. "One blurry picture of something that could be anything. That's not evidence, Thomas. That's a Rorschach test." They argued while the rain hammered against the roof, each drop a drumbeat of doom. I sat apart from them, staring at the window where the creature had appeared the night before. The glass was still intact, but I could see marks on the outside, scratches that hadn't been there before. Claw marks, deep grooves in the wood of the frame where it had gripped the sill. I didn't tell the others. What would be the point? We all knew it would come back. The only question was when. The rain continued through the morning and into the afternoon. By 3 o'clock, the sky had grown so dark it might as well have been night. We lit the lanterns and candles we had brought, casting the cabin in flickering light that made the shadows dance like living things. The atmosphere was suffocating, the air thick with humidity and the smell of our own fear. Emily was the first to break. She had been quiet since morning, curled in a corner with her knees drawn to her chest, but now she stood suddenly, her eyes wide and unseeing. "I have to go," she said, her voice strange and distant. "I have to go now. It's calling me." "Emily, sit down," Sarah said, reaching for her assistant. "You're in shock." "No," Emily pulled away, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Can't you hear it? It's singing, it's beautiful, I have to go to it." She walked toward the door, and for a moment I thought she would simply open it and walk out into the storm. But Rebecca grabbed her, pulling her back, and Emily collapsed, sobbing, the strange trance broken. "It's hypnotic," Marcus said, his psychological training finally finding purchase. "The eyes. The witnesses mentioned it. They draw you in, make you want to go to them. It's a hunting strategy. The creature uses its eyes to lure prey." "Then we don't look at them," David said. "If we see it, we look away. We don't meet its gaze." Good advice, perhaps, but impossible to follow when the eyes were all you could see, when they burned themselves into your retina and followed you into your dreams. The afternoon wore on, each minute an agony of waiting. We tried to eat, but the food stuck in our throats. We tried to talk, but the words felt meaningless. We were simply waiting, marking time until the inevitable. It came at sunset. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and through the clouds the last light of day filtered in shades of blood red. I was standing at the window, staring out at the tree line when I saw movement. Not the creature itself, but something else. Something that made my blood run cold. The birds were leaving. Hundreds of them, thousands, erupting from the trees in a panicked mass, their cries filling the air with a cacophony of terror. They flew in all directions, colliding with each other in their haste to escape, some falling from the sky like stones. Whatever was coming, the animals knew. They were running. "Something's happening," I said, and my voice was steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. The others gathered around the windows, watching the exodus. The forest was emptying, every living creature fleeing as fast as it could. Squirrels dashed across the yard, rabbits burst from the underbrush. Even the insects seemed to be fleeing. The mosquitoes and moths that had plagued us since our arrival now vanished. "It's coming," Thomas whispered. We didn't have long to wait. The sun dipped below the horizon and the last light faded from the sky. Darkness fell like a curtain, absolute and complete. And in that darkness the red eyes appeared. They were at the tree line, 2 points of crimson floating in the void. Then another pair appeared and another. 5 pairs of eyes, 10 burning orbs, watching the cabin from 5 different angles. We were surrounded. "There can't be more than one," David said, his voice barely audible. "The sightings, they always described a single creature." "Maybe it can duplicate its eyes," Marcus suggested. "Or maybe there are more than we thought." The eyes moved closer, floating through the trees with unnatural grace. We could hear the wings now, the rhythmic beating that sounded like a massive drum. The air pressure seemed to change, our ears popping as if we were ascending a mountain. The creature, or creatures, were massive, their presence displacing the air itself. "Everyone away from the windows," Sarah commanded, and we obeyed, pressing ourselves against the far wall of the room. The eyes stopped moving. They hung in the darkness 50 yards from the cabin, watching, waiting. "Why doesn't it attack?" Jennifer asked, her voice a whimper. "It's playing with us," I said. I didn't know where the knowledge came from, but I was certain of it. "It's enjoying this, the fear, the anticipation." Minutes passed. The eyes remained motionless, unblinking. Then, one by one, they began to rise. Up and up, climbing toward the treetops until they were visible against the cloud-choked sky. The beating of wings intensified, and I realized with horror that the creatures, whatever they were circling above us. The first impact came without warning. Something slammed into the roof with the force of a falling tree, shaking the entire structure and sending plaster raining down from the ceiling. A second impact followed, then a third, the creatures landing on the roof and moving across it, their claws scraping against the shingles. "They're trying to get in," Rebecca screamed. "The bedroom," David shouted. "The window in the bedroom is weaker." He was right. The main bedroom had an old casement window, the wood rotted by years of exposure. We had noticed it when we arrived, commented on how it needed to be replaced. Now that weakness would be our undoing. We heard the glass shatter, the sound of claws gripping the window frame, the tearing of wood. Then the screaming started. It was Thomas. He had been closest to the bedroom door and he saw what came through. His scream was like nothing I had ever heard, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror that went beyond fear into some primal realm of horror. Then it cut off, suddenly, brutally. We didn't see what happened next. We heard it. The sound of impact of something heavy hitting the floor, the wet tearing of flesh, the cracking of bone, and over it all, a sound that would haunt me until my dying day, the smacking of lips, the slurping of something feeding. "Thomas!" Rebecca shrieked, and she ran toward the bedroom. I grabbed her, pulling her back. "Don't!" I screamed. "Don't go in there!" She fought me, clawing at my face, her nails raking across my cheek. But I held on, and after a moment she collapsed against me, sobbing. The sounds continued from the bedroom. The feeding. The creature was eating Thomas, consuming him while we cowered in the next room. I could hear the snap of ribs being broken, the wet smack of organs being pulled from the body cavity. The smell began to drift through the doorway, the coppery tang of blood mixed with something else, something sulphurous and wrong. Then it stopped. The silence was worse than the sounds had been. We stood frozen, listening, waiting. Something moved in the bedroom. Heavy footsteps, the click of claws against wood. Then the door began to open. It was too tall for the frame, had to duck to enter the room. The Mothman, the creature we had sought, now stood before us in the full glory of its horror. It was bigger than I remembered, 7 feet tall at least, with shoulders that brushed the ceiling. Its wings were folded against its back, but even furled they filled the space, membranous curtains that seemed to drink the light. And its eyes, those terrible, hypnotic red eyes. They swept across the room, touching each of us in turn, and where they lingered, I felt a pressure in my mind, a compulsion to step forward to offer myself. The creature's face, if it could be called that, was a smooth oval of gray flesh, featureless except for those burning eyes. But as I watched, it split open, revealing a mouth that stretched impossibly wide, filled with rows of needle teeth that dripped with Thomas's blood. It had no tongue, just that endless maw, that tunnel into darkness. It stepped forward and we stumbled back, pressing ourselves against the wall. It moved with a strange grace for something so large, its movements fluid and deliberate. It was choosing, I realized, deciding which of us would be next. Its gaze settled on Daniel, my roommate, my friend. Daniel, who had laughed with me about the legend, who had come on this trip for adventure. Daniel, who was now frozen in place, his eyes locked with the creature's, his face slack with hypnotic trance. "No," I whispered, but the creature ignored me. It reached out with one long-fingered hand, the claws extending like blades, and touched Daniel's chest. Not piercing, not yet, just a gentle caress that left 5 bleeding lines across his shirt. Daniel didn't react. He just stood there, waiting. The creature's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, until it seemed the creature's entire head was nothing but maw. It leaned forward and I turned away. I couldn't watch. I couldn't bear to see what came next. But I heard it. The wet crunch of teeth meeting bone, the spray of blood against the wall, hot and coppery. The gurgling scream that Daniel tried to make but couldn't, his throat already severed. The chewing, the grinding, the swallowing. The creature didn't just kill, it consumed, it devoured. When I looked back, Daniel was gone. Not dead on the floor, but entirely gone. The creature had eaten him, bones and all, in the space of 3 minutes. Only the blood remained, painting the wall in patterns that would never wash clean. The creature turned to us, its mouth still dripping. It had fed, but it was not sated. I could see that in its eyes, the hunger that burned there, the endless appetite. It would kill us all, one by one, and it would take its time. "The back door," Marcus whispered. "Run for the back door." We moved as one, a surge of desperate humanity fleeing from the predator. The creature was fast, faster than anything had a right to be, but its size worked against it in the confined space. It had to turn, to maneuver, and that gave us seconds. We burst through the back door and into the night, scattering in all directions. I ran for the woods, my only thought to put distance between myself and that terrible thing. I heard the others behind me, their footsteps pounding in the mud, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature didn't follow immediately. It was still in the cabin, I realized, feeding on what remained of Thomas, or waiting, playing with us, letting us run so it could hunt. I made it to the tree line and plunged into the forest, branches whipping against my face, roots tripping my feet. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just ran. Behind me, I heard the others. Rebecca was screaming, her voice high and terrified. David was shouting orders, trying to gather us, but we were past obedience. We were animals now, fleeing from death. The wings beat above me, and I threw myself to the ground as something massive passed overhead. The wind from its passage knocked me flat, sent me rolling down a slope into a dry creek bed. I lay there, stunned, looking up at the sky. It was circling, a black shape against the stars, its wings blocking the moonlight as it passed. It was hunting, searching for us in the darkness, and it would find us. It was only a matter of time. I crawled along the creek bed, my hands sinking into the mud, my clothes soaked with water and filth. I had to find the others. We stood a better chance together, though I knew in my heart that no number of humans could stand against that thing. I found them 100 yards downstream, huddled together in the shelter of a fallen tree. Sarah, Rebecca, Marcus, Jennifer, and Emily. David was missing. "He went back," Sarah sobbed. "He went back for his notes. The fool went back for his notes." We heard his scream a moment later, distant but clear, cut off with terrible finality. The creature had found him. Another one gone. "We have to keep moving," Marcus said. "If we stay here, it will find us." "Where do we go?" Jennifer asked. "We can't outrun it, we can't hide from it, it sees in the dark." "The car," I said. "If we can make it to the car, we can drive. It can't catch a car." "The keys were in Thomas's pocket," Rebecca said, her voice hollow. "They're in the cabin with that thing." We were trapped. No escape, no way out. The creature had us exactly where it wanted us. The wings beat closer and we scattered again, running blindly through the woods. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning in the darkness and the terror. I stumbled through brambles that tore my skin, fell into gullies that bruised my bones, crashed through underbrush that whipped my face until I was blinded by my own blood. I emerged into a clearing, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. The moon had broken through the clouds, casting silver light across a small meadow, and in the center of that meadow I found the next horror. It was Emily. She was still alive, but barely. Her legs were broken, twisted at impossible angles. Her chest was a ruin of ribs and exposed organs, but her eyes were open and they tracked me as I approached. "It played with me," she whispered, blood bubbling from her lips. "Dropped me from the sky again and again." I knelt beside her, taking her hand. There was nothing I could do. The injuries were fatal, obvious even to my untrained eyes. She was dying and dying badly. "Don't let it take me again," she gasped. "Please." I understood. She was afraid the creature would come back, would take her body, consume what remained. I looked around the clearing, found a rock, heavy and jagged. I raised it above my head, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The blow was merciful, quick. She felt nothing. I told myself she felt nothing. I told myself that for years afterward, though I never quite believed it. I stood there in the moonlight, the rock still in my hand, my friend's blood on my clothes. I had killed her. I had murdered her to spare her from a monster. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming, a weight that would never lift. The wings beat overhead and I dropped the rock, running again. I couldn't help her anymore. I could only try to survive. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against a tree trunk, my chest heaving, my vision swimming. I had lost all sense of direction, all sense of place. I didn't know where the others were, didn't know where the creature was. I was alone in the dark with a monster, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to die. But the creature didn't come. I waited, listening, but the only sounds were my own ragged breathing and the night wind in the trees. Where was it? Why hadn't it taken me? I huddled there for what felt like hours, waiting for death that wouldn't come. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear and I slipped into unconsciousness, still sitting against that tree, still waiting. When I woke, it was dawn. The forest was quiet, the birds singing as if nothing had happened. I was alive. Against all odds, against all reason, I was alive. I made my way back to the cabin, moving slowly, my body aching from the night's exertions. I found the others there, those who remained. Sarah, Marcus, Jennifer, and Rebecca. They had made it back too, drawn by the same instinct that had guided me. We didn't speak. We just stood there, looking at the cabin, at the blood that stained the walls, at the hole in the roof where something had torn its way inside. Thomas's remains were scattered across the bedroom floor, barely recognizable as human. Daniel was entirely gone, consumed completely. David's body lay in the yard, his chest torn open, his organs arranged in a pattern that might have been ritualistic or might have been random. We couldn't tell. We buried what we could find of Thomas and David in shallow graves behind the cabin. We didn't have shovels, so we used our hands, scraping at the earth until our fingers bled. It took hours, but none of us complained. It was penance of a sort. We had led them here. We had brought this upon them. When we finished, we sat together on the porch, waiting for the phone lines to be restored, waiting for someone to come looking for us. We didn't discuss what had happened. We didn't need to. We had all seen it, all lived it. Words were unnecessary. But the creature wasn't done with us. As we sat there, the sun climbing higher in the sky, we heard the sound of wings. We looked up, and there it was, circling high above, a black speck against the blue, watching, waiting. It knew we were still here. It knew we were alive, and it was patient. It would wait until night fell again, and then it would come for us. "The bridge," Sarah said suddenly. "Agnes Thompson, she said the bridge would fall. She said many would die." "The Silver Bridge," Marcus said. "It connects Point Pleasant to Ohio. If it collapses." "Hundreds could die," Jennifer finished. "Thousands if it's during rush hour." "It was showing me," I said, remembering the vision from the night before. "When it looked at me through the window, I saw the bridge, the water, the bodies. It's not just hunting us. It's hunting everyone." "Then we have to warn them," Rebecca said. "We have to tell someone." "Who would believe us?" Sarah asked. "A bunch of college students talking about a monster that predicts the future. They'll lock us up." "But if we're right," Marcus said, "if the bridge really does collapse and we didn't warn anyone." "We're damned either way," I said. "If we talk, we're crazy. If we're right, we're guilty." We argued for hours, going in circles, finding no solution. The creature circled overhead, patient, eternal. It knew we had no escape. The day passed in a haze of fear and indecision. We tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash. We tried to sleep, but every sound made us jump. We were alive, but we weren't living. We were simply existing, waiting for the night. As the sun began to set, we made our decision. We would go to the bridge. We would try to warn the authorities, to convince them to close the bridge until the danger passed. It was a desperate plan, probably futile, but it was better than sitting here waiting to die. We gathered our things, what little we had, and prepared to leave. But as we stepped off the porch, we heard the sound of wings descending. The creature was coming. "Run," Marcus shouted. But it was already too late. The Mothman dropped from the sky like a thunderbolt, landing directly in front of Rebecca. She had time for one scream before its claws closed around her throat, lifting her into the air. The creature beat its wings once, twice, and rose above the treetops, carrying her with it. We watched in horror as it circled, higher and higher, until Rebecca was just a speck against the sky. Then it released her. She fell for what seemed like an eternity, her body tumbling end over end, her scream Dopplering into silence. She hit the ground not 50 feet from where we stood, the impact splitting her open like a dropped melon. Blood and organs sprayed across the dirt, across our clothes. She died instantly, her body shattered beyond recognition. The creature landed on her remains, folding its wings, and looked at us. Its eyes blazed with triumph, with hunger. It was showing us what would happen to us all. We ran. There was nothing else to do. We abandoned Rebecca's body, abandoned the cabin, abandoned any hope of dignity or courage. We simply ran, and the creature let us go. It had made its point. It was in control. We ran through the woods, toward the road, toward town, toward any hope of safety. We didn't stop until we reached the highway, gasping and sobbing, our bodies pushed beyond any reasonable limit. A truck driver stopped for us, a kind man with a concerned face who asked what had happened. We told him there had been an accident at the cabin, that our friends were dead. We didn't mention the creature. We knew better by now. He drove us to the sheriff's station in Point Pleasant, where we filed our report. 2 dead in a wild animal attack, we said. Bear, maybe, or mountain lion. The sheriff was skeptical, but the evidence at the cabin would support our story. The claw marks, the blood, the dismemberment. It could be attributed to any large predator. But we knew the truth, and as we sat in the sheriff's office giving our statements, I looked out the window and saw it. The Mothman, perched on the roof of the building across the street, watching us through the glass. It had followed us. It would always follow us. I pointed it out to the others, but when they looked, it was gone, vanished into the shadows. I was the only one who had seen it, the only one who would continue to see it. We were released that evening, told not to leave town in case there were further questions. We checked into a motel, 4 survivors out of 8, each of us carrying the weight of what we had witnessed. We didn't speak. We just sat in our separate rooms, staring at the walls, waiting. The creature didn't come that night. Perhaps it was sated, perhaps it was planning. Whatever the reason, we were given a reprieve, a few hours of precious sleep before the horror resumed. But I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the darkness, and I thought about what was coming. The bridge, the collapse, the deaths. The creature had shown me the future, and I knew with absolute certainty that it would come to pass. I had to warn them. I had to try. Tomorrow I would go to the bridge. Tomorrow I would try to stop the catastrophe. But for now I just sat and watched the night and waited for the red eyes to appear. They didn't come, not that night, but I knew they would, they always would, until the end. Chapter 3: The Omen. Monday morning dawned with a sky the color of tarnished silver, the clouds hanging low and heavy over the town like a shroud. I had not slept. I had not even tried. The images of the previous night played on an endless loop in my mind. Rebecca's body tumbling through the air, the wet crunch of her impact, the creature's eyes burning with satisfaction. 4 of us remained now. 4 survivors out of 8. And I knew, with a certainty that transcended reason, that the number would grow smaller before this was over. We gathered in the motel's cramped breakfast room, the 4 of us sitting in silence around a table littered with food we couldn't eat. Sarah looked like she had aged 20 years overnight, her face haggard, her eyes hollow. Marcus kept twitching, his head snapping toward every shadow, every sound. Jennifer stared at nothing, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold her coffee cup. And me? I sat apart from them, watching the door, watching the windows, waiting for those red eyes to appear. "We need to talk about what we're going to do," Sarah finally said, her voice raspy. "What's there to talk about?" Jennifer asked, her voice flat. "It's going to kill us, one by one, until there's no one left." "We don't know that," Marcus said, though he didn't sound convinced. "I saw it," I said quietly. "Last night, after we got here, it was watching us from across the street." They stared at me. "Why didn't you say something?" Sarah demanded. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You'd have thought I was hallucinating, and maybe I was, but I saw it. It's here, in town. It's not going to let us go." "Then we leave," Jennifer said. "We get in a car and we drive as far away from here as possible." "And take it with us?" Marcus asked. "What if it follows? What if we bring it to another town? More people could die." "More people are going to die anyway," I said. "The bridge, remember, Agnes Thompson said the bridge would fall. I saw it too, in my vision, hundreds of people, maybe thousands. You can't seriously believe that, Sarah said. That thing is a predator, it's not psychic, it can't predict the future. Then how do you explain the timing? I asked. Every sighting, every appearance happens right before a disaster. The witnesses yesterday. Crow said his cattle died before the creature appeared. But what if that's backwards? What if the creature appears because death is coming? That's insane, Sarah said. Is it? The Mothman is a harbinger, that's what the legends say. It doesn't cause the disasters, it warns of them, or maybe it feeds on them, or maybe it's drawn to them like a moth to flame. I don't know, but I know what I saw, and I know the bridge is going to collapse. They were silent for a long time. Outside, traffic passed on the street, normal sounds of a normal day. People going to work, going to school, living their lives unaware of the doom that was coming. The Silver Bridge, Marcus said slowly. It was built in 1928. It's an I-bar suspension bridge, old design. They've been talking about replacing it for years. Then maybe it's not supernatural, Jennifer said hopefully. Maybe it's just a structural failure. Old bridge, heavy traffic. It was going to happen eventually. And the creature just happens to appear right before, I asked, every time. Coincidence, Sarah said, but she didn't sound like she believed it. We need to warn them, I said. The authorities, the town, someone. We tried that, Marcus reminded me. We told the sheriff about the cabin. He didn't believe us about the bear. He sure as hell won't believe us about a psychic moth monster. Then we don't tell him about the creature. We tell him about the bridge. We say we've seen structural damage, cracks in the supports, something. They'll check, Jennifer said. They'll go look and see there's nothing wrong, and then they'll dismiss us as crackpots. Maybe there is something wrong, I said. Maybe the creature knows something we don't, or maybe it's not just watching, maybe it's causing it. Now you're contradicting yourself, Sarah pointed out. Is it predicting the future or causing it? I don't know, I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. I don't know what it is or what it wants or how it works. I just know that people are going to die if we don't do something, and I can't live with that on my conscience. They stared at me, shocked by my outburst. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Look, I said, my voice more controlled. We don't have to mention the creature. We can say we're concerned about the bridge's condition. Civil engineering students, concerned citizens, whatever. We convince them to close it for inspection. Even a few hours could save lives. And if we're wrong, Jennifer asked. Then we're wrong. Embarrassment is better than mass death. They exchanged glances, silently communicating. Finally, Sarah nodded. Okay, we try, but we do it carefully. No mention of monsters or prophecies, just concerned citizens worried about infrastructure. Agreed, I said. We finished our breakfast, such as it was, and set out for the bridge. The Silver Bridge was the main artery connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to Gallipolis, Ohio. It carried thousands of vehicles every day, commuters and truckers and travelers. If it collapsed during peak hours, the death toll would be catastrophic. The bridge was beautiful in its way, an engineering marvel of its time with its suspension cables and elegant towers. But looking at it now, through the lens of my vision, I could see it differently. I could see the water below, dark and cold, waiting. I could see the cars falling, tumbling, the people screaming. I could see the bodies floating. We walked across the span, pretending to be tourists, examining the structure. Marcus, with his engineering background, pointed out various features, making notes in a pad he carried. He identified areas of concern: rust on the suspension cables, wear on the deck plates, stress fractures in the eye-bars. Some of this is serious, he said quietly, his face pale. The bridge is old. It does need maintenance, but I don't see anything that suggests imminent collapse. That doesn't mean it won't happen, I said. It doesn't mean it will, either. We reached the Ohio side and turned back. On the return crossing, I felt it. A presence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew, without looking, that we were being watched. I turned slowly, scanning the sky. There, on top of the eastern tower, a dark shape silhouetted against the clouds. The Mothman perched like a gargoyle, watching the traffic flow below. "Don't look," I whispered to the others. "Don't make eye contact." But Jennifer had already seen it. Her breath caught in her throat, a small sound of terror. "It's here," she whispered. "Walk," I said. "Don't run, just walk." We continued across the bridge, trying to maintain a normal pace. The creature watched us, its head tracking our movement. I could feel its gaze, even with my eyes downcast. It was amused, I thought. It was enjoying this. We reached the West Virginia side and descended to the street below. Only then did I allow myself to look back. The tower was empty. The creature was gone. "It knows," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "It knows what we're planning." "Maybe it's worried," Marcus suggested. "Maybe if we close the bridge, we foil its plan." "Or maybe it wants us to try," I said. "Maybe this is all part of the game." We walked to the county courthouse, where we requested a meeting with the bridge commissioner. We waited for 2 hours in a dingy lobby that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Finally, we were shown into an office occupied by a heavy-set man named Harold Vance, whose face bore the permanent expression of someone who dealt with bureaucracy and complaints. "What can I do for you?" he asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "We're concerned about the Silver Bridge," I said. "We're students of civil engineering, and we've noticed some structural issues that worry us. We think the bridge should be closed for inspection." Vance looked up, his expression skeptical. "Structural issues, like what?" Marcus spoke up, detailing the rust and wear we had observed, using technical terms he had learned in his coursework. Vance listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to grudging interest. "Those are maintenance issues," he said when Marcus finished. "Not safety issues. The bridge is inspected regularly. It passed its last inspection 2 months ago." "Things can change," I said. "Stress can cause metal fatigue. Traffic has increased. Weather has been bad. We're just asking for a precautionary closure, a few hours, just to be sure." "Do you know how much revenue that bridge generates?" Vance asked. "Do you know what closing it would do to the local economy? We can't shut down the main artery between 2 states because a bunch of college students are nervous." "People could die," I said, my voice rising. "If that bridge collapses, dozens, hundreds of people could die." "The bridge is safe," Vance said firmly. "I've seen the reports. I know the engineers who inspect it. If there were a serious problem, we would know." "You don't know," I said. "You can't know. Sometimes things fail without warning." "Is there something specific you're not telling me?" Vance asked, his eyes narrowing. "Something beyond normal concerns?" I hesitated. I could tell him. I could tell him everything about the creature and the visions and the deaths, but I knew what would happen. He would have us escorted out, possibly committed. No one would believe us. "No," I said, "just, please, close the bridge for a few hours." "I'm sorry," Vance said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "I can't do that. The bridge stays open." We left the courthouse defeated. The sun was high now, the day warm and pleasant. People walked the streets, shopping and chatting, completely unaware of the doom hanging over them. "What now?" Jennifer asked. "We try someone else," I said. "The mayor, the governor, the media. Someone has to listen." We spent the afternoon trying. We talked to reporters who dismissed us as conspiracy theorists. We called the governor's office, where an aide patronizingly thanked us for our concern and promised to look into it. We even tried standing on the street corner with signs, warning people away from the bridge, but the police moved us along. By evening, we were exhausted and demoralized. Nothing had worked. No one would listen. "Maybe we should just leave," Jennifer said. "Get in a car and drive away." And abandon all these people, I asked. Let them die. They're going to die anyway, she screamed, her composure finally breaking. Don't you understand? We can't stop this. It's going to happen. And if we stay, we die too. She's right, Marcus said quietly. We've tried. We've done everything we can. We need to save ourselves. The creature won't let us, I said. Don't you see? It's not just about the bridge, it's about us. It's been marking us, hunting us. If we try to leave, it will stop us. Rebecca tried to run. Look what happened to her. Then what do? Sarah asked. We stay. We warn everyone we can. And we hope that when it happens, we're not on that bridge. We returned to the motel as darkness fell. The four of us crowded into one room, barricading the door, covering the windows. We were targets and we knew it. The creature could come at any time. But it didn't. The night passed in tense silence, broken only by our own breathing. The creature was elsewhere, perhaps preparing for the main event, perhaps simply enjoying our fear. Tuesday morning I woke to screaming. Not human screaming, animal screaming. I ran to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. The parking lot was littered with bodies. Birds mostly, but also squirrels, raccoons, stray cats. Dozens of them, arranged in a circle around the motel, their necks broken, their bodies torn. The creature had been busy during the night. It's a message, I said, my voice hollow. It's telling us we're next. We didn't leave the room that day. We ordered food from the diner across the street, had it delivered, though the delivery driver looked at us like we were insane. We watched television, trying to find distraction, but every channel seemed to show death and disaster. The news was full of accidents and fires and violence, as if the entire world was succumbing to the same darkness that had consumed Point Pleasant. As the sun began to set, I knew. I could feel it in my bones, in the pressure of the air. Tonight was the night. The bridge would fall, and the creature would be there to witness it. I'm going, I said. Going where? Sarah asked. To the bridge. I have to see. I have to know. You're insane, Jennifer said. If you go there, you'll die. Maybe, but I have to try. I have to see if there's something I can do, some way to stop it. I'm coming with you, Marcus said. No, stay here, stay safe. None of us are safe, he said, and I can't sit here anymore waiting. If I'm going to die, I'd rather do something. We argued for an hour, but eventually, Sarah and Jennifer agreed to stay while Marcus and I went to the bridge. It was a foolish plan, probably suicidal, but we couldn't just wait anymore. We walked through the darkening streets, watching the sky. The town was quiet, peaceful. People were eating dinner, watching television, preparing for bed. They had no idea what was coming. We reached the bridge approach at 8:30 p.m. The bridge was busy with evening traffic, headlights streaming across in both directions. It looked solid, permanent, eternal. It seems fine, Marcus said. It's not, I said. I could feel it now, a wrongness in the air, a vibration that shouldn't be there. The bridge was humming, singing a song of metal fatigue and impending failure. We walked out onto the span, keeping to the pedestrian walkway. The river below was dark, the current strong. The water would be cold, deadly cold. Do you see anything? Marcus asked. No, but it's here. I can feel it. We reached the middle of the span and stopped. Above us, the suspension cables arched gracefully, holding the deck aloft. But looking closer, I could see things I hadn't noticed before. The eyebars connecting the cables to the towers were worn, pitted with corrosion. Some showed hairline cracks. Look, I said, pointing. Marcus examined the metal. Stress fractures, he said, his voice tight. They must have been here for years, but there, spreading, growing, look at the corrosion around them. It wasn't this bad yesterday, I said. Something's accelerating it. The creature, Marcus asked. Maybe, or maybe just time. We heard the sound then. A groan of metal, deep and resonant, like a giant clearing its throat. The bridge shuddered beneath our feet. What was that? Marcus asked, his face pale. "The bridge," I said. "It's starting." We ran for the Ohio side, but we had barely reached the first tower when we heard another sound. The beating of wings. The creature was here. It landed on the tower above us, its claws gripping the steel, its wings folded against its back. Those terrible red eyes looked down, studying us, studying the bridge. "Go," I shouted to Marcus. "Run." But he was frozen, staring up at the creature, his face slack with awe and terror. "Marcus," I grabbed him, shaking him. "Don't look at its eyes, run." He stumbled, breaking the spell, and we ran. Behind us, the creature launched from the tower, circling above, watching. We reached the Ohio side and kept running down the approach into the town of Gallipolis. Behind us, we heard the sound of the bridge, the metal screaming as stress turned to failure. We turned back just in time to see the eastern tower shudder, then buckle. The suspension cables snapped with a sound like thunder, whipping through the air with deadly force. The deck collapsed in sections, cars tumbling into the river below, their headlights still blazing as they sank. The screaming started, the screaming of people trapped in their vehicles, falling, drowning, the screaming of those on the banks who watched in horror, the screaming of the night itself. The creature circled above the destruction, its wings spread wide, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. It was feeding, I realized, not on flesh this time, but on death itself, on the terror, on the tragedy. "My God," Marcus whispered, "all those people." "We tried," I said, my voice hollow. "We tried to warn them." "Not hard enough," he said. "We didn't try hard enough." The collapse continued for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. When it was over, the bridge was gone, replaced by a tangle of twisted metal and floating debris. The river was full of bodies, some visible in the moonlight, others already swept downstream. 46, Marcus said. "What?" "That's the number I keep seeing. 46 people died tonight." I didn't ask how he knew. In the face of such horror, numbers seemed pointless. But he was right. Later they would count them. 46 dead, 2 bodies never found. The worst bridge collapse in American history. The creature landed on the remains of the tower, looking out over its handiwork. Then it turned and looked at us. Even at this distance, I could feel its gaze, the weight of its attention. It had what it wanted, the disaster, the death, but it wasn't finished with us. We had survived, and that was an affront. We had witnessed, and that was its purpose. It launched into the air and flew toward us. We ran, but it was faster. It landed in front of us, blocking our path, its wings spread wide, its eyes burning. "Marcus," I whispered, "don't look at its eyes." "I can't help it," he said, his voice dreamy. "They're so beautiful." "Marcus, no." But it was too late. He stepped forward, drawn by the hypnotic gaze, walking toward the creature like a sleepwalker. "Marcus, stop!" I grabbed him, but he was stronger than he looked, fueled by whatever compulsion the creature had placed on him. He pulled free and kept walking. The creature waited patient until Marcus was within reach. Then it struck. The claws moved faster than I could see, a blur of motion that ended with Marcus's chest torn open. He didn't scream. He just looked down at the wound, confused, as if trying to understand what had happened. Then he collapsed. The creature bent over him, its mouth opening, beginning to feed. I ran. I didn't look back. I abandoned my friend to that thing, ran into the darkness, through the streets of Gallipolis, away from the bridge, away from the horror. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, collapsing in an alley behind a grocery store, my chest heaving, my mind broken. Marcus was dead. They were all dead. Thomas, Daniel, David, Rebecca, Emily, and now Marcus. 6 of my companions consumed by that monster. Only Sarah and Jennifer remained, and me. The creature let me go. I don't know why. Maybe it was full, sated by the feast on the bridge. Maybe it wanted me to suffer, to carry the memories. Maybe it had chosen me, marked me as the witness, the one who would survive to tell the tale. I stayed in that alley for hours, shaking, crying, lost in a darkness deeper than the night around me. When dawn finally came, I made my way back to the motel, back to the others. They were alive, huddled together in our room, terrified. They had heard the news, seen the reports on television. The bridge had collapsed, dozens were dead, and Marcus was gone. I told them what happened. The words came out mechanically, like a recording. I felt detached from myself, as if watching the scene from outside my body. "It's over," Sarah said. "The disaster happened. Maybe now it will leave us alone." But I knew better. I had seen its eyes. I had seen the hunger there. It wasn't over. It would never be over, not until we were all dead. The day passed in a blur of police interviews and media attention. We were witnesses of a sort. We had been on the bridge before the collapse. We had tried to warn people. Now everyone wanted to talk to us, to ask us what we had seen. We told them about the structural damage, about our concerns. We didn't mention the creature. Who would believe us? But I saw it, even as I talked to the reporters. Perched on buildings, watching from rooftops, following me wherever I went. It was always there now, a constant presence at the edge of my vision. By evening, the news was everywhere. The Silver Bridge collapse was national news. The president expressed his condolences. Investigations were launched, but none of it mattered. 46 people were dead and the creature had fed. That night I sat by the window of our motel room, watching the darkness. Sarah and Jennifer were asleep, exhausted by the day's events. I should have slept too, but I couldn't. I knew what was coming. It came at 2:47 a.m., the same time as my first sighting. The creature was nothing if not consistent. It landed on the window sill, its claws scratching against the glass. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just watched. It stared at me, those red eyes burning, and I felt the connection between us. The bond of witness and witnessed. It had chosen me, I realized. Out of all of us, I was the one who would survive, the one who would carry the story. Why? I didn't know. Maybe because I was the weakest. Maybe because I was the most broken. Or maybe because I was the most willing to see, truly see, what it was. It stayed there for an hour, watching me watch it. Then it spread its wings and flew away, vanishing into the night. I slept then, finally, a dreamless sleep that was almost like death. When I woke, the creature was gone, but its mark remained. I was different now. Changed. We stayed in Point Pleasant for 3 more days, giving statements, helping with the investigation. Then we were released, told we could go home. Sarah and Jennifer left immediately, returning to their families, their lives. They would never speak of what happened, never mention the creature. They would try to forget, to move on. I doubted they would succeed. I stayed. Someone had to remember. Someone had to keep watch. The Mothman had come to Point Pleasant and it had fed. But it would come again. It always came again. And next time more would die. I was the sole survivor of my group. The only one left to tell the tale, and tell it I would, though no one would believe me. They would say I was crazy, that I had imagined it, that the trauma had broken my mind. But I knew the truth. I had seen the red eyes, I had witnessed the horror, and I would carry that knowledge to my grave and perhaps beyond. The Mothman still watches from the shadows, still waits for the next disaster, the next feast. It is patient, it is eternal, and it remembers me just as I remember it. This is my story. This is the truth. Believe it or not, it doesn't matter. The creature is real, the deaths were real, and the horror never ends. Chapter 4: The Night of Wings. The days following the bridge collapse passed in a blur of official proceedings and media frenzy that felt like a grotesque carnival, a celebration of death and destruction that served only to highlight the absurdity of our situation. The investigators wanted to know about the structural damage we had observed, about our warnings to the bridge commissioner, about everything except the one truth that mattered: that a creature from nightmare had orchestrated the tragedy, had fed upon it, had chosen who would live and who would die. I told them what they wanted to hear. I described the rust on the suspension cables, the hairline fractures in the eye bars, the groaning of overstressed metal. I played the part of the concerned citizen, the observant student, the innocent bystander who had tried to prevent disaster. And all the while I could see it, perched on the courthouse roof, gliding between buildings, watching from the shadows with those terrible red eyes. Sarah left on the third day after the collapse, her face hollow, her eyes avoiding mine. She couldn't look at me anymore, couldn't bear the reminder of what we had witnessed. She mumbled something about needing to finish her research, about writing her report, but we both knew she would never write about this. Some things were too terrible for academic journals. "Take care of yourself," she said, the words hollow and meaningless. "You too," I replied, though I knew that none of us would ever truly be cared for again. The creature had seen to that. Jennifer stayed one day longer, sleeping 16 hours at a stretch, waking only to scream at shadows. She told me she kept seeing it in her dreams, that red gaze burning into her soul, promising things she couldn't understand. "It's still hungry," she whispered on her last morning. "It's not finished. It will never be finished." I didn't try to comfort her. What comfort could there be? We were marked, chosen by something beyond our comprehension, something that fed on terror and death. The only mercy was that the creature seemed sated for now, its appetite temporarily satisfied by the 46 souls it had claimed at the bridge. But I knew it wouldn't last. The hunger would return, and when it did, we would be waiting. I remained in Point Pleasant alone, renting a room at a different motel, one far from the site of our original terror. The new place was near the river, a cheap establishment frequented by truckers and traveling salesmen, people who wouldn't ask questions about a solitary young man who spent his days staring at the sky and his nights barricaded in his room. The town was different now. Where before there had been innocence, a sleepy community going about its business, now there was fear. People spoke in hushed tones about the bridge, about the victims, about the strange omens that had preceded the disaster. The Mothman legend, once a local curiosity, had become something darker, something that demanded reverence and dread. I found myself drawn to the places where it had been seen. The TNT area, where we had first encountered the creature. The old factory, now a ruin of concrete and rust. The woods where we had fled in terror, where Emily had died. I visited these sites like a pilgrim visiting holy places, though what I sought was not salvation but understanding. The TNT area was worst. The concrete igloos stood like ancient tombs in the overgrown landscape, their entrances dark mouths promising secrets and horrors. I walked among them during the day, when the sun was high and the shadows were short, but even then I could feel the presence. The creature had nested here, had made this place its home. The air was different, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. I found evidence of its habitation on my third visit. Scattered bones, some animal, some too large to be anything but human, arranged in patterns that might have been decorative or might have been ritualistic. The bones were old, weathered, some showing signs of having been gnawed. How long had it been here? How many had it taken before our group arrived? I collected one of the smaller bones, a finger bone perhaps, and carried it with me as a talisman. It was foolish perhaps, but I felt that by acknowledging the creature's kills, by bearing witness to them, I was fulfilling some purpose. The bone was cold in my pocket, heavy with the weight of death. The nights were the worst. I would lie in my motel room, the lights burning, the television playing static, waiting. Sometimes it would come, landing on the roof or scratching at the window. Sometimes it would simply watch from a distance, a silhouette against the moon. It never attacked, never tried to enter. It was simply there, a constant reminder of my status as the chosen witness. Other times it would show me things. Visions that came unbidden, flashes of futures that might be. A car accident on Route 35, 5 dead. A fire at the elementary school, children screaming. A gas explosion at the diner, bodies blown apart. They were prophecies of doom, potential futures that the creature dangled before me like a cat torturing a mouse. Why? I would scream at it through the glass. Why show me these things if I can't stop them? It never answered. It didn't need to. The message was clear. I was meant to witness, not to intervene. My role was to watch and remember, to carry the stories of death to those who would come after. I tried to warn people, of course. I went to the sheriff with my visions, tried to tell him about the car accident that would happen on Tuesday, the fire that would claim lives on Thursday. He looked at me with pity and suspicion, asked if I was feeling all right, suggested I see a doctor. When the accidents happened exactly as I had described, he came looking for me, not to ask how I knew, but to accuse me of causing them. "You're always there," he said, his face hard with suspicion. "Every time something bad happens, you're nearby. You're either the unluckiest man alive or you're involved somehow." "I'm trying to stop them," I said. "I'm trying to save people." "Then why don't they get saved? Why does everyone you warn end up dead?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself 1,000 times. The creature showed me the future, but my warnings never worked. The car accident happened despite my warning to avoid Route 35. The fire started despite my call to the fire marshal. It was as if my prophecies were cursed, as if by speaking them aloud, I guaranteed their occurrence. "I'm not doing this," I told the sheriff. "Something else is, something I can't control." "Then maybe you should leave town," he said, "for your own safety and for ours." I considered it. Point Pleasant was becoming a graveyard, the casualties mounting as the creature's appetite returned. Since the bridge collapse, there had been a dozen deaths, each one preceded by sightings of those red eyes. The town was paralyzed with fear, businesses closing, people refusing to leave their homes after dark. But I couldn't leave. The creature wouldn't let me. I tried twice, packing my bags and driving toward the highway, only to find it waiting at every exit, perched on road signs and overpasses, blocking my path. I was trapped here, just as surely as if I were in a cell. "You're holding me prisoner," I screamed at it one night, standing in the parking lot of my motel, surrounded by empty cars and the hum of the highway. "Why? What do you want from me?" It landed on the roof of the motel, its wings folding with that terrible sound of leather snapping. It looked down at me, and I felt its thoughts, alien and vast, pressing against my consciousness. "Witness," it whispered in my mind. "Remember, tell." "Tell who?" I demanded. "Who will believe me?" "Everyone, no one, it doesn't matter. What matters is the telling. The story must be told." "Why?" But it wouldn't answer. It simply watched me with those burning eyes until I retreated to my room, trembling and alone. The pattern of deaths continued. A truck driver found torn apart in his cab on the interstate. A couple killed in their home, their bodies arranged in some ritualistic fashion. A child taken from her bedroom window, leaving only blood and feathers. Each death was preceded by sightings, each sighting reported in hushed tones to authorities who could do nothing. I came to understand the creature's feeding habits. It didn't need to eat constantly, didn't require daily sustenance like a normal predator. It feasted on tragedy, on terror, on the psychic energy of death. The bridge collapse had been a banquet, sustaining it for weeks. But as the memory faded, as the terror became normalized, it needed more. Smaller meals, scattered deaths, each one designed to keep the fear alive. I was part of this cycle, I realized. The witness, the storyteller, the one who spread the fear. By telling what I had seen, by confirming the legends, I was feeding the creature as surely as if I were bringing it victims. Every person who believed my story, who carried the terror in their heart, was another morsel for the Mothman's feast. But I couldn't stop. The compulsion to tell was as strong as the compulsion to witness. I needed to speak, needed to write, needed to share what I had seen. It was part of the bond between us, the connection that the creature had forged that first night when it had looked into my eyes. I began keeping a journal, writing down everything. The sightings, the visions, the deaths. I filled pages with descriptions of the creature, its appearance, its habits, its hunger. I wrote until my hand cramped, until my fingers bled, until the words became a torrent that I couldn't control. The journal grew thick with entries, each one dated and timed, each one a testament to the horror that had become my life. I hid it in a safe place, a storage unit on the edge of town, where no one would find it until I was ready, until I was gone. Because I knew how this would end. The creature had shown me that too, in flashes of vision that came during my darkest moments. I would die here in Point Pleasant, consumed by the thing that had marked me. Not yet, not for years perhaps, but eventually. When my usefulness as a witness was over, when I had told my story to everyone who would listen, then the Mothman would finally claim me. It was a grim knowledge, but one I had accepted. There was no escape from fate, no way to avoid the destiny that the creature had planned. I was its prophet, its chronicler, and eventually its final meal. But before that happened, there would be more death. The creature's hunger was growing again, the small meals no longer sufficient. It needed another feast, another tragedy to sustain it. And as December approached, as the anniversary of the first sightings neared, I felt the pressure building, the sense of impending doom that preceded the worst disasters. It would happen at Christmas. I saw it in a vision, clear and terrible. The town gathered for celebration, the decorations bright against the winter dark, and then the coming of wings. The Mothman descending on Main Street, its eyes blazing, its hunger unrestrained. Dozens dead, maybe hundreds. I tried to warn them. I went to the mayor, the city council, the newspaper. I told them to cancel the Christmas festivities, to keep people home, to avoid gathering in crowds. They laughed at me, called me a crank, a madman. The sheriff threatened to arrest me if I continued spreading panic. "You're obsessed," he said. "You've lost your mind, there is no creature. The bridge collapse was an accident. The other deaths are unrelated. You're seeing patterns where none exist." "But the sightings," I protested. "Hundreds of people have seen it." "Hysteria," he said. "Mass suggestion. People see what they expect to see." "What about the bodies, the torn flesh, the arranged remains?" "Animals," he said. "Bears, maybe, or mountain lions, or human killers. There are always explanations that don't require monsters." He was wrong, of course. I knew he was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. The creature was too clever, too careful. It left no evidence that couldn't be explained away, no proof that would convince a rational mind. So I prepared alone. I stockpiled supplies in my motel room, candles and batteries and canned food. I boarded my windows, barricaded my door. When the attack came, I would be ready. Not to fight, I knew I couldn't fight it, but to survive, to witness, to tell the tale. The days ticked by, each one bringing me closer to the appointed time. The town decorated for Christmas, lights and garlands appearing on every street, music playing from every store. The cheerfulness seemed grotesque, a mockery of the doom that was coming. I watched the sky constantly now, tracking the creature's movements. It was more active, appearing nightly, sometimes multiple times. It circled the town like a vulture, marking its territory, preparing its feast. Other people saw it too. The sightings increased, reported in the newspaper with growing concern. The sheriff dismissed them as mass hysteria, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew something was coming, even if he wouldn't admit what. On Christmas Eve, the town held its annual celebration on Main Street. A tree lighting ceremony, carolers, hot chocolate and cookies for the children. It was exactly what the creature wanted, a gathering of innocence, a concentration of life that it could snuff out in moments. I watched from my motel room, the window cracked despite the cold, listening to the distant sounds of celebration. The sun set early, the darkness complete by 5 o'clock. The lights of the town blazed against the night, a beacon that would draw the predator. At 6:30, I heard the first scream. It came from Main Street, distant but unmistakable. A woman's voice cut off abruptly. Then another scream and another, rising into a chorus of terror. I grabbed my coat and ran, not away from the danger but toward it. I was the witness. I had to see. The streets were chaos. People running in all directions, tripping over decorations, crashing into each other in their panic. Above them, circling, diving, the Mothman struck again and again. It was feeding openly now, without disguise or subtlety. It swooped down on the crowd, its claws extended, snatching victims from the ground and carrying them into the air. I watched as it lifted a man in a Santa suit, his arms and legs flailing, and dropped him from 50 feet onto the pavement. The impact was wet, final. A child was next, a little girl in a red coat. The creature took her gently, almost tenderly, and carried her up to the roof of the hardware store. It laid her there, still alive, still screaming, and began to feed while the crowd watched in helpless horror. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. This was my purpose, my curse. I had to witness. The sheriff appeared, his gun drawn, firing at the creature. The bullets had no effect, simply passing through the wings or bouncing off the gray flesh. The creature ignored him, continuing its feast. "Get inside," the sheriff was screaming. "Everyone get inside." But there was no inside to get to. The creature blocked the doors, hurting the crowd, playing with them. It would let someone run almost to safety, then swoop down and snatch them back, tossing them into the air like a cat playing with a mouse. I saw an old man trampled in the panic, his body crushed by fleeing feet. I saw a woman impaled on a Christmas decoration, the metal star piercing her chest. I saw a child separated from his parents, lost in the chaos, crying for help that wouldn't come. The creature descended to the ground, landing in the center of Main Street, its wings spread wide, its eyes burning with triumphant hunger. It stood there, 10 feet tall, a monument to nightmare, and let the crowd flow around it, snatching victims at will. I pushed through the crowd, not fleeing but approaching. I had to see. I had to understand. The creature turned as I neared, its head tracking my movement. It knew me, recognized me. I was different from the others, marked for a different fate. "Witness," it whispered in my mind. "I'm here," I said aloud. "I'm watching." It turned away, dismissing me, and returned to its feeding. I stood there in the middle of the massacre and watched as people died around me. A young couple tried to run past me, hand in hand. The creature's wings swept out casually and knocked them off their feet. Before they could rise, it was upon them, its mouth opening, closing, opening again. When it moved on, they were barely recognizable as human. A priest approached, Bible in hand, chanting prayers. The creature regarded him with something like curiosity, then reached out with one clawed hand and tore his chest open. The Bible fell to the ground, pages fluttering, soon stained with blood. The sheriff continued firing, emptying his weapon uselessly. When the bullets were gone, he tried to charge the creature with his bare hands. The Mothman caught him easily, lifted him high, and slowly, deliberately broke him in half. The sound was like a branch snapping, wet and sharp. I lost count of the deaths. 20, 30, more. The street was littered with bodies, the snow stained red, the Christmas lights reflecting off pools of blood. It was a scene from hell, a vision of the end of all things. And through it all I watched. I stood in the center of the carnage, untouched, unharmed, while death raged around me. The creature never touched me, never threatened me. I was sacred, protected, set apart from the slaughter. When it was over, when the creature had fed its fill and the survivors had fled, the Mothman turned to me one last time. Its eyes blazed, and I felt its satisfaction, its satiation. The feast had been good. "Witness," it said again. "I have witnessed," I replied. "Tell them," it commanded. "Tell them what you saw." "I will." It spread its wings and rose into the air, ascending straight up, faster and faster, until it was lost among the stars. I stood alone in the ruined street, surrounded by death, the sole witness to the horror. The sirens came eventually, the ambulances and police cars, the shocked faces of first responders who had never seen anything like this. They asked me what happened, and I told them. I told them everything. They didn't believe me, of course. They thought I was in shock, that I was hallucinating. They sedated me, took me to the hospital, kept me under observation while they cleaned up the street. 37 dead, they counted. 37 lives ended on Christmas Eve by a monster that didn't exist. The official story was a gas leak explosion, followed by panic and stampede. It didn't explain the claw marks, the bite patterns, the bodies carried to rooftops, but no one asked those questions. It was easier to believe in gas leaks than in monsters. I spent 3 days in the hospital, sedated and restrained. When they finally released me, I found that the town had changed. The Christmas decorations were gone, taken down in mourning. The streets were empty after dark, people too terrified to venture out. The creature had achieved its purpose. The fear was absolute now. Point Pleasant would never be the same. I walked through the empty streets, past the boarded-up shops and darkened homes. I was the only one on the sidewalk, the only soul brave or foolish enough to be out after sunset. It found me on the bridge approach, the spot where the silver bridge had stood before its collapse. The empty piers rose from the water like broken teeth, monuments to destruction. The creature was waiting for me, perched on the western pier, its wings folded. It didn't speak, didn't send visions. It simply watched as I approached. "Why me?" I asked. "Why did you choose me to survive?" It didn't answer. Perhaps there was no answer, or perhaps the answer was too vast for human understanding. "I'm the only one left," I said. "Sarah and Jennifer are gone. They left town, left the state. They won't come back, it's just me now." The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and I felt something like approval, like satisfaction. "I'll tell your story," I promised. "I'll tell them all, I'll make them believe." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. No one would believe me. I would be the crazy man, the survivor who lost his mind, the witness whose testimony was dismissed. The truth would die with me, or it would live only in whispered legends, campfire stories, the kind of tale that no one truly believes. The creature seemed to understand this. It spread its wings, blocking the moonlight, casting me in shadow. "Witness," it said one last time. Then it was gone, vanished into the night, leaving me alone with the ruins and the dead. I walked back to my motel room, my footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The world had changed, had become a darker place, and I was the only one who knew why. The Mothman was real, the Mothman was here, and the Mothman would return. This is my testimony. This is what I saw. Believe it or not, it doesn't matter. The truth exists independent of belief. The creature exists, waiting in the darkness, patient and eternal. It marked me, chose me, made me its witness. And I will carry that burden until the day I die, which I know will not be of natural causes. The Mothman will come for me eventually, when my story is told, when my purpose is fulfilled. And on that day, I will finally understand why. Until then, I wait, I watch, I remember. And I tell anyone who will listen that the legends are true. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 1967. The year the Mothman came. The year of death. The year I became the sole survivor, the only witness, the chronicler of horror. The red eyes are watching. They are always watching. And they will never forget. Chapter 5. The Silver Bridge. The winter of 1967-1968 settled over Point Pleasant like a funeral shroud, cold and gray and suffocating. The Christmas massacre had broken something in the town, a spirit of resilience that had endured even the bridge collapse but could not survive the carnage on Main Street. Businesses closed permanently. Families moved away. The population dwindled as people fled the curse that had befallen their home. I remained. I had no choice. The creature had marked me, bound me to this place with chains of terror and obligation. Wherever I went, it followed, those red eyes appearing at the edges of my vision, watching, waiting, reminding me that I was never truly alone. The official death toll from the Christmas attack was 37, though I knew the true number was higher. Several people had vanished that night, carried away by the creature to feeding grounds unknown. Their bodies were never found, their fates never determined. They were simply gone, erased from existence by a monster the world refused to acknowledge. I spent the winter months in a haze of alcohol and sleeplessness, trying to forget what I had seen, trying to escape the visions that came every night. The creature showed me things even in my dreams, futures that might be, disasters that could unfold. A plane crash that would kill 200, a train derailment that would poison a town, an earthquake that would level a city. I wrote them all down, filling notebooks with prophecies of doom, though I no longer bothered to try warning anyone. I had learned that lesson well. The future could not be changed. The creature's visions were not warnings but promises, guarantees of death that would come to pass regardless of what I did. The bridge reconstruction began in February, a massive project to replace the fallen silver bridge with a new span. The workers came from all over the country, engineers and construction crews who didn't know the town's history, who laughed at the stories of a winged monster. I watched them from a distance, knowing that some of them would not survive the project. It started with small accidents. A worker who fell from a scaffold breaking his back, a crane operator who suffered a heart attack at the controls, an engineer who disappeared on his lunch break, never to be seen again. Each death was attributed to natural causes or human error, but I knew better. The creature was feeding again, smaller meals this time, building its strength for something larger. I tried to warn the construction foreman, a tough man named Johnson who had built bridges all over the world. He looked at me with the same mixture of pity and suspicion that I had become accustomed to. "I appreciate your concern," he said, "but I've got 50 men working this site. They're professionals, they know the risks." "It's not the work," I said, "it's something else, something that lives here." "The Mothman," he said, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief. "Yeah, I've heard the stories. It's good for tourism, I suppose, but I've been in this business for 30 years. I've seen accidents, I've seen death. It's always explainable, always human error or mechanical failure. There's no such thing as monsters." "The Silver Bridge collapsed," I said. 46 people died. Was that human error?" "Metal fatigue," he said. "Poor maintenance. Old design, it happens." "And the Christmas massacre, 37 dead on Main Street. Was that a gas leak?" He shifted uncomfortably. "That was different, a freak occurrence, not a monster." "I was there," I said. "I saw it. The claws, the wings, the eyes. I watched it kill them one by one." "Son, you've been through a trauma," he said, his voice softening. "I've seen it before. Men who witness terrible things, their minds can't process it. They invent explanations, create monsters to make sense of the senseless. It's natural, it's human, but it's not real." I left him there, knowing that nothing I could say would convince him. He would learn the truth eventually, as everyone did. Some lessons could only be taught by death. The deaths continued through the spring. By May, 7 workers had died in accidents on the bridge site. The crew was spooked, though they wouldn't admit why. Tools went missing, equipment malfunctioned, strange sounds echoed through the girders at night. Several men quit, refusing to work the night shift, claiming they heard wings in the darkness. I knew the creature was preparing. The new bridge was nearly complete, scheduled to open in June. It would be a grand ceremony, a celebration of recovery and renewal. Thousands would gather to walk across the new span, to witness the rebirth of the town. And the creature would be there, waiting. I saw it in a vision, clear as daylight. The ribbon cutting, the speeches, the crowd walking onto the bridge. And then the descent from above, the red eyes blazing, the wings blocking out the sun. Death on a scale that would dwarf the original collapse. Hundreds dead, maybe thousands. I tried one last time to warn them. I went to the mayor, the city council, the newspaper. I begged them to cancel the ceremony, to open the bridge quietly without fanfare. They called me a troublemaker, a fearmonger, a crazy man who couldn't let go of the past. The bridge is safe, the mayor said. We've had engineers inspect it. The design is modern, the materials are new. Nothing will happen. It's not the bridge, I said. It's what comes with it. The thing that lives here, that feeds on death. It knows about the ceremony, it will be there. There is no thing, the mayor said, his patience exhausted. There is no monster. There is only you and your delusions and your need to be important. You're obsessed with being the center of attention, with being the one who knows the truth. But the truth is that you're sick. You need help. I need help, I agreed. But not the kind you mean. I need protection. I need someone to believe me. Leave, he said. Leave Point Pleasant. Go somewhere else, anywhere else. Get treatment. And stop spreading your poison in my town. I couldn't leave, of course. The creature wouldn't let me, but I didn't tell him that. What would be the point? The day of the ceremony dawned bright and clear, a perfect June morning that seemed designed for celebration. The new bridge gleamed in the sunlight, silver and white, a beautiful structure that would connect the town to the world. I watched from the West Virginia side, standing apart from the crowd. Thousands had gathered, more than I had expected. The creature would feast well today. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock. The mayor gave a speech about resilience and recovery. The governor spoke about progress and hope. The ribbon was cut, and the crowd surged forward, eager to be among the first to cross the new span. I watched the sky, waiting. It was there, I knew, somewhere above the clouds, circling, waiting for the perfect moment. The crowd was halfway across when it came. It didn't descend from above. It rose from below. The creature burst from the river like a missile, water streaming from its wings, its eyes blazing with a light that rivaled the sun. It had been hiding under the bridge, waiting in the water, and now it emerged in the center of the crowd, a nightmare-given form. The screaming started immediately. People tried to run, but they were packed too tight, too many on the narrow span. The creature didn't attack immediately. It simply stood there, its wings spread wide, its eyes sweeping across the crowd, drinking in the terror. Then it began. It moved with impossible speed for something so large, snatching people from the crowd and tossing them into the river below. Some died from the fall, hitting the water with bone-breaking force. Others drowned, dragged under by the current, their screams silenced by the cold, dark water. The creature was more brutal this time, more direct. It didn't play with its victims, didn't prolong the suffering. It simply killed, efficiently and terribly, a machine of death operating at maximum capacity. I saw an old woman snatched up, her body bitten in half, the two pieces tossed in opposite directions. I saw a child crushed under the creature's foot, the small body flattened like a bug. I saw a man try to fight back, swinging a piece of lumber at the creature's head, only to have his arm torn off at the shoulder and used to beat him to death. The bridge became a slaughterhouse, the white concrete stained red, the railings decorated with body parts and entrails. The water below ran crimson with blood, the surface littered with the floating dead. And I watched. I stood on the shore, unable to move, unable to look away, fulfilling my purpose as the creature's witness. It took 20 minutes. When it was over, the creature stood alone on the bridge, surrounded by hundreds of bodies. It had killed them all, every person who had ventured onto the span, leaving no survivors but those who had not yet crossed. It turned to me then, those red eyes finding me across the distance. I felt its satisfaction, its satiation. This was the feast it had been waiting for, the culmination of months of planning. "Witness," it whispered. "I witness," I said, my voice breaking. It spread its wings and launched into the air, ascending until it was a speck against the blue, then vanished. I walked onto the bridge, stepping carefully over the bodies. The smell was overwhelming, the copper tang of blood mixed with the stench of opened bowels and the sweet rot of death. I had seen horror before, but this was beyond anything I had imagined. The death toll was 312 people. 312 lives ended in 20 minutes of carnage. The worst single-event killing in American history, attributed to a structural collapse of the new bridge. But the bridge hadn't collapsed. I examined it carefully, walking its length, and found no damage. The creature hadn't come for the bridge. It had come for the people. The cover-up was massive, the authorities desperate to hide the truth. The official story was a catastrophic failure of the new bridge, a design flaw that caused the deck to give way under the weight of the crowd. The evidence was destroyed, the bodies buried quickly, the witnesses silenced or dismissed as crazy. I was arrested, of course, held for weeks while they tried to break my story. They told me I was a suspect, that I had been seen at the scene, that my presence was suspicious. They interrogated me for hours, days, demanding to know how I had caused the disaster, what explosives I had used, who had helped me. I told them the truth. I told them about the creature, about the red eyes, about the wings and the claws. I told them about the first sighting, the cabin, the bridge collapse, the Christmas massacre. I told them everything. They didn't believe me. How could they? The truth was too terrible to accept. Eventually, they released me for lack of evidence. There were no explosives, no accomplices, no motive. Just a crazy man with a wild story present at the scene of a tragedy. I returned to my motel room, now the only resident of the establishment. The town was emptying, people fleeing the curse that had taken over 300 lives. Point Pleasant was becoming a ghost town, a place that people whispered about, avoided, feared. And I remained the sole witness, the only one who knew the truth. The creature came to me that night, landing on my windowsill as it had so many times before. It looked at me, and I felt something different in its gaze. Not hunger, not satisfaction, but gratitude. Why, I asked, why all this death? Why did they have to die? It didn't answer, couldn't answer. Its mind was too alien, its motivations too strange for human understanding. But I felt something in its gaze, a connection that had grown stronger with each witnessing. I was part of it now, part of its cycle. The witness, the storyteller, the one who kept the fear alive. Without me, the deaths would be meaningless, forgotten as accidents and tragedies. With me, they became legend, myth, a story that would persist. The creature needed me as much as I feared it. We were bound together, predator and witness, monster and chronicler. I don't want this, I said. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Some part of me craved the witnessing, needed the horror, fed on the terror as surely as the creature fed on flesh. I was addicted to the fear, to the knowledge, to the terrible purpose the creature had given me. It spread its wings and took flight, leaving me alone in my room, surrounded by darkness and the memories of death. 312 people. I said their names aloud, one by one, a litany of the lost. They deserved to be remembered, these victims of a monster the world refused to see. I would remember them, I would tell their story, and the creature would be pleased. The Mothman had claimed its greatest victory. Point Pleasant was broken, the survivors scattered, the town destroyed. And I was the only one left to carry the tale. The red eyes watched from the shadows, and I knew that this was only the beginning. The creature was eternal, its hunger was endless, and I would be there always, witnessing, remembering, telling. Until the day it finally claimed me. And that day I knew was coming soon. Chapter 6: The Sole Survivor. The year that followed the bridge massacre was the darkest of my life, and that is saying something given the horrors I had already witnessed. Point Pleasant became a wasteland, a town of empty streets and boarded windows, populated only by those too poor or too stubborn to leave. The few who remained spoke in whispers, crossed themselves at the sight of shadows, kept their children indoors after sunset. And I remained, The phantom of the town, the crazy man who walked the streets at night, who claimed to see monsters, who carried the weight of 312 deaths on his shoulders. People avoided me, mothers pulling their children close when I passed, shopkeepers locking their doors. I was marked. They sensed it, even if they didn't understand how or why. The creature came to me often during that year, not to hunt but to commune. It would perch outside my window, its eyes glowing in the darkness, and I would feel its thoughts pressing against my consciousness. Images of past hunts, ancient memories of civilizations long gone, feasts of death that had sustained it for millennia. I learned that the creature was old, older than human civilization, older than recorded history. It had hunted the dinosaurs, fed on the mass extinctions, grown fat on the plagues and wars that had shaped human history. It was not merely a predator but a force of nature, an embodiment of entropy and destruction. And I was its chosen witness, the latest in a long line of chroniclers who had kept its memory alive through the ages. The legends of dragons and demons, of angels of death and harbingers of doom, all traced back to the creature, or to others like it. They were the shadows in human history, the darkness behind the light. The knowledge should have driven me mad, and perhaps it did. I found myself writing constantly, filling volumes with descriptions of the creature, accounts of its hunts, theories about its origins and purposes. I wrote until my fingers bled, until my eyes burned, until the words became a physical compulsion that I couldn't control. The creature wanted this, I realized. It wanted its story told, its legend spread. The fear fed it as surely as the flesh, the terror of those who read my words sustaining it between the physical feasts. I was its biographer, its propagandist, its priest. I tried to stop writing once. I burned my notebooks, destroyed my manuscripts, swore never to speak of the creature again. It punished me with visions of pain, showed me futures where my friends and family died, where I was responsible for countless deaths. It broke my will as it had broken so many before me. So I wrote. I wrote and I told and I spread the fear, knowing that with every word I was damning others to the terror that consumed me. The creature's physical appearances became less frequent as the year wore on. It had fed well on the bridge massacre, sustained for months by the psychic energy of the deaths. But its hunger was returning, and I knew that another feast was coming. I saw it in visions, clearer than ever before. A fire that would consume the town, burning everything to ash. The creature descending from the smoke-filled sky, red eyes blazing, wings spread wide against the flames. Death on a scale that would finally erase Point Pleasant from existence. I tried to warn them. I went door to door, telling people to leave, to run, to save themselves. They looked at me with pity and fear, the crazy man with his wild stories, and closed their doors. I stood in the town square and shouted the prophecy, warning of the fire to come, the destruction that awaited. The sheriff arrested me for disturbing the peace, kept me in a cell for 3 days until I promised to stop. I promised, but I didn't mean it. How could I stop when I knew what was coming? The fire started on a Tuesday night in October, exactly as I had seen. It began at the old munitions plant, the TNT area, where the creature had first nested. Chemicals that had been buried for decades ignited, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air. The fire spread quickly, feeding on the dry autumn grass and the wooden structures of the town. Within hours, the entire eastern half of Point Pleasant was burning. People fled their homes, carrying what they could, streaming out of town in every direction. And the creature was there, gliding above the flames, riding the thermals, its eyes reflecting the fire. It didn't attack at first, simply watched, circling, waiting. I stood on the outskirts of town, watching the destruction, fulfilling my role as witness. The heat was intense, even from this distance, the air thick with smoke and ash. I could feel the creature's presence, its satisfaction at the chaos unfolding below. Then it descended. It landed in the center of the burning town, among the fleeing people, and began to hunt. It didn't need to fly now, didn't need to swoop and carry. It simply walked through the streets, snatching victims from the crowd, feeding on the panic and terror as much as on the flesh. I saw it take a woman who was running, her clothes on fire, and extinguish the flames with its wings before consuming her. I saw it catch a child who had fallen, lift him gently, almost tenderly, before tearing him apart. I saw it play with a group of teenagers, letting them run almost to safety before snatching them back, one by one, until none remained. The fire raged for 3 days, consuming most of the town before rain finally extinguished it. When it was over, Point Pleasant was gone, replaced by blackened ruins and drifting smoke. The death toll was in the hundreds, impossible to determine exactly because so many bodies had been consumed by the flames. The creature had fed well, grown strong on the destruction. It would not need to hunt again for a long time. I walked through the ruins, the only living thing in a landscape of death. The creature had spared me, as always, left me untouched while everything around me burned. I was the witness, the survivor, the one who would tell the tale. And tell it I did, to the rescue workers who came to search for bodies, to the reporters who descended on the disaster, to the government officials who investigated the cause. I told them all about the creature, the red eyes, the wings, the hunger. They called it trauma. They called it survivor's guilt. They called it madness. They didn't believe me, but they wrote down my words, recorded my testimony, archived my story for future reference. That was enough for the creature. Its legend was secure now, its name recorded in official documents, its existence whispered about in the aftermath of disaster. The Mothman of Point Pleasant would be remembered, feared, spoken of in hushed tones. The town was abandoned after the fire. The survivors relocated, scattered to other towns and states. Point Pleasant ceased to exist as a functioning community, becoming instead a legend, a ghost town, a place of horror and memory. And I remained, living in the ruins, the only permanent resident of the wasteland. I built a shelter from the remains of burned buildings, gathered supplies from the abandoned stores, survived on what the disaster had left behind. The creature came to me often in those days, perching on the ruins, watching me with its red eyes. It seemed content. Its hunger satisfied, its purpose fulfilled, it could simply exist, resting between the feasts that sustained it. I grew old in the ruins, aging decades in just a few years, the stress and horror taking their toll on my body. My hair turned white, my skin wrinkled, my back bent. But my eyes remained clear, and I never stopped watching, never stopped waiting. The creature had marked me as its witness, and I would fulfill that role until my dying breath. Years passed. The ruins became overgrown, consumed by forest, reclaimed by nature. The memory of Point Pleasant faded, becoming just another ghost story, another urban legend. The Mothman was mentioned in books and articles, dismissed as folklore, explained away as mass hysteria. But I knew the truth. I was the truth, the sole survivor of the horror, the only witness to the reality of the creature. And now, as I write these final words, I feel the end approaching. The creature has been restless lately, its hunger returning after years of dormancy. I have seen it circling the ruins at night, red eyes blazing, wings beating against the darkness. It is coming for me. I know this with absolute certainty. My time as witness is ending. My time as victim is beginning. I don't fear death. Not anymore. I have lived with terror for so long that the prospect of ending is almost welcome. What I fear is the manner of my ending, the final moments of pain and horror that await me. But even that I will accept. I have witnessed the deaths of hundreds, seen the terror of the creature's feeding, understood the magnitude of its hunger. My death will be just another in a long line, another meal for the eternal predator. I write this final account in the hope that someone someday will find it. Someone who will read my words and understand that the legends are true, that the monsters are real, that the darkness waits just beyond the edge of the light. The Mothman exists. It has always existed. It will always exist as long as there is fear to feed it, death to sustain it, witnesses to remember it. I am the last witness of Point Pleasant, the sole survivor of a horror that consumed a town. My story ends here, in these ruins, with the creature that has haunted my every moment for years. It is outside now. I can hear its wings, feel its eyes burning through the walls of my shelter. It is time. I will not run. I will not hide. I will stand and face it as I have faced it 1,000 times before. And in my final moments, I will witness one last time, see the truth of the creature in all its terrible glory. The red eyes are at the door. The wings are spreading. The end has come. I am ready. To whoever finds this, remember me. Remember the others. Remember Point Pleasant. And when you see the red eyes in the darkness, when you feel the presence of something watching from the shadows, know that the Mothman is real. Run. Run while you can. The Mothman is here. The Mothman is always here. The Mothman will never die. End of record. Addendum by the finder. I discovered these papers in the ruins of what was once Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the summer of 1975. The author was never identified, his body never found. The shelter in which he had lived showed signs of violence, claw marks on the walls, stains that might have been blood, a hole torn in the roof. Of the creature he described, I found no evidence, but I did not search long. The woods around the ruins are dark, and the shadows move in ways that seem wrong. I left quickly, taking these papers with me. I have read them many times in the years since, trying to understand, trying to believe. The rational part of my mind dismisses them as the ravings of a madman, a traumatized survivor who invented a monster to explain the disasters that befell his town. But sometimes, late at night, I look out my window and see something at the edge of the darkness. 2 points of red, watching, waiting. And I remember the words of the author, the Mothman is always here. I believe him now. I believe. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe, so you don't miss the stories yet to come.